All right. Welcome, everybody, to the Great American Mail, the Georgia and Florida lawyer who breaks down the events of the day and interprets them through the lens of the law, the Constitution, and history. And it looks like today, the January 6th committee, they have not started there. Let's see the clock over there. It looks like about 13 minutes they're going to start. So we're going to bring you up to speed on what's going on with the January 6th committee. This is a hearing that was called sort of at the last minute. I'm not really sure why they decided to do this at the last minute, but they did. Today, we're supposed to see from Cassidy Hutchinson, who was an aide to Mark Meadows. We will see what she has to say before the committee. It will be interesting. Again, they've already gotten live testimony from her that they videotaped. She'll be here, obviously, in person live today if what the news reports are saying is correct. And apparently it look like they're starting here. Hold on a second. Let me get over there. See if we can close this up a bit. Maybe a second. Let me pause it. See if I can get this fixed here. Full screen. Oh, I don't want that. Dadgummit. Exit full screen. Sorry about that. We may have to look at it like that. So anyway, it looks like they're getting ready to go. Let's see what's going on over here. This is the Select Committee's website. They haven't started. It doesn't look like over there. Yeah, they're still just. So we'll see what's going on. So they're gonna pile in a moment, and when they do, let me see if I can do it in another. Yeah, well, all right, we'll be fine when they start. We'll get to it when they get there. All right, so just to bring you up to speed on what's been going on. Apparently, I don't know if they're going to go 2 hours. Typically, they've been going 2 hours on these things. We shall see if they go the entire 2 hours. My guess is that they will, just because they don't understand how ineffective they've been and are being. So my guess is we will hear from this witness, and they'll make the speeches and things, and it will end up being 2 hours. No reason to do that in my view. But let's do a quick. Let me pull up my. Here we go. Now you're looking. You should be looking now. Let me try to squeeze that in a little bit. So we're picture in picture. There we go. So you should be looking at. I don't know why it's doing that. Let me move that over there. All right. So let me try to stretch it down a little bit and see if we can. Well, all right, doesn't matter. So the January 6th committee is basically trying to prove about 7 things here that they're listed, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And so, again, they haven't really added anything recently, so let me just expand that just a little bit because it looks like fun just cut off. Okay, so the first thing they're trying to prove, and I think this is about the only thing that they've effectively, in my view, demonstrated. Again, I'm not saying that it's something that's illegal or is going to get them anywhere. I honestly don't think it will get them anywhere. We shall see. I don't think it's going to get them anywhere at all. But they have, I think, pretty effectively shown that the violence happened because Trump had people there and because Trump was challenging the election. I don't think it's of any moment, but it is what it is. The main thing they've been concentrating on for the last 3 days, and will today again, has been challenging Biden's certification as a coup, is an insurrection. And we'll get to that as we do the live stream today. If you go over to our greatamericanmail.substack.com, you will see there that this has been something that the committee has been about for a long time, and a lot of people just didn't realize. And that basically what's going on is they always understood that it was more than just about the rally that got out of control. And so they're trying to suggest that any challenging of Biden's certification is a coup. And Kinzinger, in the last hearing, the 5th hearing, and by the way, we've live streamed all of them. So if you like this one, subscribe, please, tell other friends, and then you can go check up any of our live streams. We've got the same analysis going through all of them. But he really attacked this idea. And on the last hearing, on the 5th day, they suggested that basically doing anything past the so-called safe harbor of December 20th was inappropriate. There's nothing legally true about that, and we've debunked that in the past because Democrats did it in 2005. They did it in 2016. Members of this committee, namely Jamie Raskin, did it against Trump in 2016. So they are really, really out to lunch there. The next thing they're trying to prove is that Trump incited the violence In order to show that, you're going to have to show meet the Brandenburg test. That's why we've got Brandenburg versus Ohio there. They can't do that, not even close. We're probably going to do a single issue podcast out there and explain how it is they can't do that. But anyway, the next thing they've tried to prove is that Trump was derelict in his duty on January 6th. Again, haven't done a very effective showing of it. But this is all the talk about, Trump didn't call out the National Guard. Trump didn't call the military. Pence did all that. Again, not very effective, because how do you know Trump didn't tell Pence to do it? So kind of silly there. Trump is not eligible for future office via Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. We've got a lot of articles as the show goes on today. We'll point you to those, and you can read about that. But that's something that's been in the news under the Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. If you were a participant in an insurrection, you're not eligible for a future public office. So we shall see what comes of that. But anyway, so let's see, what's the other one? Trump has a connection with the Oath Keepers or the Proud Boys, who had an independent insurrection plan. We don't know what that's all about. I have no idea what that's about at all. We shall see at some point what it's about. Again, they don't really do a good job. It just sort of seems like they're throwing a bunch of things up and see which one sticks on the wall. Last thing is Trump grifted Americans. It should say buy. It should say buy, not B-U-Y. Raising campaign cash for a legal defense fund, which didn't exist, and he never spent the cash on the lawsuits. That's probably the worst one that they've done, really, because it doesn't make any real sense. It's like, wait a minute. First off, there's nothing wrong with people raising cash. People in Washington, D.C., including members of this committee, do it all the time. I don't know what they're talking about at all, really. It's just nonsense. And so they really shouldn't be talking about that. But I'm trying to think of the only other one that's out there, and that is that is the last one that's out there, I think. So we shall see. Let's see what's going on the hearing on the committee there. Let's see what's going on. Let me switch back to Safari, and we should be ready to go. We're pretty close to it there. All right, that's those folks there. Let's see what they're doing. Let's turn up the volume. It doesn't look like there's much of anything going on there. So we'll go ahead and mute them again. See what's going on in the select committee. I don't see that either. Try to refresh that. All right, so let's go over to Substack. If you go to our Substack, greatamericanmail.substack.com, which we've done right there for you, it's pretty simple. We've got a lot of articles on these issues that you can read. The one that I would probably highly advise that you read if you want to understand really where they're trying to go here, and where I think they're ultimately, when you see their report and you see some of the culmination of things that they're trying to do, I think you're going to start to see this. And that is an article up here. No, Trump didn't commit a crime on January 6th. Okay, if you want to go to you look on the YouTube, there's two videos that you would want to check out. The same entitlement here, no, Trump didn't commit a crime. And there's also a second one that challenging Biden's certification is not a crime. But this is a written version of what the video's up there on YouTube. And it basically does a really good job of going through, if you scroll down here, there are 3 crimes that the January 6th committee has suggested that Trump committed when he was engaging in challenging Biden's certification or challenging the election after 2020. And the reason we know about these is that the January 6th committee wanted to go get documents. They wanted to literally go get the documents from Donald Trump and others relating to any and everything about January 6th. Now, people have raised 2 problems with that. First and foremost, executive privilege that the courts, for whatever reason, including the Supreme Court, including justices appointed by Trump, would not honor. The second was attorney-client privilege. Now, with respect to John Eastman, who's kind of the architect of this whole January 6th certification challenge, he raised privilege. And there's an exception to the attorney, well, there are actually many exceptions to the attorney-client privilege. But the main exception to the attorney-client privilege is the idea that if you and your attorney are engaged in a crime, so-called crime fraud exception. So if you're engaged in a crime or in fraud, then the privilege is waived. There's no more privilege. So the judge said, okay, again, this is a Clinton appointee out in California. He said, all right, January 6th committee, tell us what the crimes were. They alleged 3. 1, that Trump obstructed Congress. I've highlighted it right here for you. Congress is proceeding to count the electoral votes on January 6th in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 1512. All right. Number 2, this is a second crime. So that's the first one. This is the second one. Trump, Eastman, and others entered into an agreement to defraud the United States by interfering with the election certification process in violation of 18 U.S.C. Section 371. And number 3, sort of a nebulous, Trump and members of his campaign engaged in common law fraud. Now, Judge Carter, again, a Clinton appointee, found it more likely than not that Trump engaged in the first 2. So these 2 here. Now, this article, if you want to read it, you can read it later if you like. This article walks you through the first one, and he basically uses the same analysis for the second one. So, and again, if you go through the article, and again, there's a lot of good resources here if you take a look at it. Here, if you go, you can click on it. Here's the order if you want to read the order yourself where he comes to this conclusion. You're welcome to do that. He also talks in here, we quote the statute, pull the language of the statute out for you. And so let me just make sure they're not ready to go. We got them paused. Let's go live. All right, we're still waiting. All right, so we're good. So one more thing I want you to understand, and this is very important, and then we're probably going to let the hearing start and see what they have to say. What they have been doing, and which is very unfortunate, but what they've been doing is they let Benny Thompson make an opening, and they let Liz Cheney make an opening. So you're going to end up the first 10 minutes going to be listening to these idiotic openings. And then whoever the questioner of the day is, we don't know who it's going to be. It'll probably be somebody new, probably Raskin is my guess. But we've already heard for several members of the committee, and it appears that each one of them is going to get one day where they are basically doing the questioning. So we shall see. And that person also gets an opening. So that ends up taking about 10 to 12 minutes or longer, which is distracting to us. But anyway, before we get to there, I want you to understand, here's what Section 1512C2 says. To prove a conviction, you have to prove the person obstructed, influenced, or impeded, or attempted to construct, influence, or impede an official proceeding of the United States of America and did so corruptly. All right. Now, again, I'm going to leave the article for you. You read it at your leisure. GreatAmericanMail.substack.com. You'll see it. Pull it down. There's the title. But I want you to understand, he basically goes in here, and it's just pure communism and socialism when he says that you obstruct, influence, or impede by attempting to go to January 6th and exercise a very valid, challenging process that was set up by the 12th Amendment of the Constitution and the Electoral Count Act of 1887, and that Democrats had done it in the past. And if you read this article, you can also pull that up, and you'll learn all about how Democrats did that in the past themselves. So I don't know what they're talking about there. And again, just to make sure these guys haven't started. It looks like we're getting ready to go here. I just want you to understand the mental state of these people and what they're doing, because they are basically, again, trying to abuse the process here. I mean, I want you to come back to this article. If you are obstructing or impeding a process, by basically showing up. I mean, this goes to the point where if you were to go down and plead not guilty to a criminal indictment, under this Judge Carter's reasoning, you could be convicted of this statute. That's how bad it is, and how bad the Democrats really want to get Trump here. So we should be going pretty close to live here. I'm not sure why they haven't gone. It looks like they might be pulling a Biden here, folks, and they're going to be late. I'm showing pretty close, 12:59, so I guess we got a few minutes. And while we got a few minutes, let me pull up another article then real quickly, another one that I would highly recommend that walks you through the Electoral Count Act of 1887. In fact, you know what I should have done? I should have stayed on that article. No, Trump didn't get a crime. I think I sewed it in here where it says ruled, and then we've talked about it in the past. The Eastman memo, yeah. Here it is right here. If you go, so if you go back and you scroll down to the bottom of the article, right before it references the Democrat challenge in 2005, if you click there, a Democrat coup part 2, we published that on January 6th. It talks about the different ways in which you can challenge and talks about why we have a 12th Amendment and Electoral Count Act of 1887. So that would be another article. You know what I'll do? When we finish the live stream today, I'll put links to those 2 articles, and I don't have them in there now, but I'll get links to those 2 articles so you can check those out and read them yourselves. And while we got a few minutes here, I don't know why they're late. And again, they take forever. They come in, they roll in, everybody has to wait because they point up the fact that they're somehow in danger. So all the hearings now, Benny Thompson's been going, hey, y'all have to sit still till we exit and leave. I didn't do the right thing here. Sorry. And it really is just sort of a troubling thing for these people to do. There you can see us live there, obviously. And then if you scroll back down here, if you go to videos, you'll see that we've got some videos up here about, in fact, January 6th. We should probably go ahead, and I need to set those aside so that they're easier to find. But the ones I was talking about here, right here, live, it's not a coup, to challenge Biden's certification. That's a very important video that walks you through some of the different issues that the January 6th committee is going to have to deal with, which basically means it's not unconstitutional, it's not illegal, it's not improper to challenge somebody's certification. Prove the fact, again, that in 2005 they tried to do it to George W. Bush, and in 2016 members of this committee, for crying out loud, tried to do it against Trump. And the other one it was a primer for the January 6th committee part 2. Here it is right here. No, Trump didn't commit a crime on January 6th. And in that case, in fact, let me just pull that up real quick. Stop people. That meant like putting a bomb out there to try and impede. It never meant saying, hey, well, I'm going to try to... All right, so I'm going to pause that. But you can see there that you see that's the actual opinion that Judge Carter issued against Donald Trump, saying that the crime fraud... Oh, it looks like they're going. Let's go live. I thought we were live.
The Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the United States Capitol will be in order. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare the committee in recess at any point. Pursuant to House Deposition Authority Regulation 10, the chair announces the committee's approval to release the deposition material presented during this hearing. Good afternoon. In our hearings over the previous weeks, the Select Committee has laid out the details of a multi-part pressure campaign driven by the former president aimed at overturning the results of the 2020 presidential election and blocking the transfer of power. We've shown that this effort was based on a lie that the election was stolen, tainted by widespread fraud, Donald Trump's big lie. In the weeks ahead, the committee will hold additional hearings about how Donald Trump summoned a mob of his supporters to Washington, spurred them to march on the Capitol, and failed to take meaningful action to quell the violence as it was unfolding on January 6th.
They have not shown how this gets him to stay in office, by the way.
The Select Committee has obtained new information dealing with what was going on in the White House on January 6th and in the days prior. Specific detailed information about what the former president and his top aides were doing and saying in those critical hours. First-hand details of what transpired in the office of the White House Chief of Staff, just steps from the Oval Office as the threats of violence became clear, and indeed, violence ultimately descended on the Capitol in the attack on American democracy. It's important that the American people hear that information immediately. That's why, in consultation with the Vice Chair, I've recalled the committee for today's hearing.
Oh, goodness.
As you've seen and heard in our earlier hearings, the Select Committee has developed a massive body of evidence thanks to the many hundreds of witnesses who have voluntarily provided information relevant to our investigation. It hasn't always been easy to get that information because the same people who drove the former president's pressure campaign to overturn the election are now trying to cover up the truth about January 6th. But thanks to the courage of certain individuals, the truth won't be buried. The American people won't be left in the dark. Our witness today, Ms. Cassie Hutchinson, has embodied that courage. I won't get into a lot of detail about Ms. Hutchinson's testimony will show. I'll allow her words to speak for themselves, and I hope everyone at home will listen very closely. First, I'll recognize our distinguished Vice Chair, Ms. Cheney of Wyoming, for any opening statements she'd care to offer.
Yeah, they've been following this model. I don't get it. This is boring. Get to it.
In our first 5 hearings, the committee has heard from a significant number of Republicans, including former Trump administration Justice Department officials, Trump campaign officials, several members of President Trump's White House staff, a prominent conservative judge, and several others. Today's witness, Ms. Cassidy Hutchinson, is another Republican and another former member of President Trump's White House staff. Certain of us in the House of Representatives recall that Ms. Hutchinson...
This is a point that they think, I mean, they keep bringing it up. They keep making two mistakes here. They keep embellishing their own witnesses. Distinguish this and a conservative Republican or all this stuff. And then they keep saying that they're Republicans. Well, folks, we all lived through the last 5 or 6 years. We all know that there are lots of Republicans that didn't like Trump. We also know that the Republican Party is a big tent. We also know the Democrat Party has purged anyone that disagrees. So this may seem exceptional to them. It's not exceptional to us that people disagree. So what?
Once worked for House Republican Whip Steve Scalise, but she is also a familiar face on Capitol Hill because she held a prominent role in the White House Legislative Affairs Office and later was the principal aide to President Trump's Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Ms. Hutchinson has spent considerable time up here on Capitol Hill representing the Trump administration, and we welcome her back. Up until now, our hearings have each been organized to address specific elements of President Trump's plan to overturn the 2020 election. Today, we are departing somewhat from that model because Ms. Hutchinson's testimony touches on several important and cross-cutting topics that are relevant to each of our future hearings. In her role working for the White House Chief of Staff, Ms. Hutchinson handled a vast number of sensitive issues. She worked in the West Wing, several steps down the hall from the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson spoke daily with members of Congress, with high-ranking officials in the administration, with senior White House staff, including Mr. Meadows, with White House counsel, lawyers, and with Mr. Tony Ornato, who served as the White House Deputy Chief of Staff. She also worked on a daily basis with members of the Secret Service who were posted in the White House. In short, Ms. Hutchinson was in a position to know a great deal about the happenings in the Trump White House. Ms. Hutchinson has already sat for 4 videotaped interviews with committee investigators, and we thank her very much for her cooperation and for her courage.
So, folks, I want you to understand, if she's already sat for 4 depositions, right, and a deposition can last as long as a day, obviously, what could she possibly have now that's groundbreaking? This is all fabricated. There's nothing new here. They know all this. Again, this is why Americans don't allow show trials.
For certain, but not all relevant topics within Ms. Hutchinson's knowledge today. Again, our future hearings will supply greater detail, putting the testimony today in a broader and more complete context.
Which they haven't done the whole time.
Ms. Hutchinson relate certain firsthand observations of President Trump's conduct on January 6th. You will also hear new information regarding the actions and statements of Mr. Trump's senior advisors that day, including his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, and his White House counsel. And we will begin to examine evidence bearing on what President Trump and members of the White House staff knew about the prospect for violence on January 6th, even before that violence began. To best communicate the information...
Yeah, Liz, you got to give Benny Thompson a little more credit than her. She drones on longer than he does. So again, the problem when you do this and you're unaware, as she is, they keep talking about the prospect for violence. We have debunked this many times. In order for them to get the challenge to the certification done, they needed peace and quiet. We all know this is a fact. This does not change. That they had stood up. They were challenging Arizona when the Capitol gets breached. That squelched the objections. Then when they came back, they didn't do it anymore. So there's nobody wanted peace and quiet more than Trump. They can't change that.
The committee has gathered. We will follow the practice of our recent hearings, playing videotape testimony from Ms. Hutchinson and others, and also posing questions to Ms. Hutchinson live. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Now, again, so she's saying we're going to follow the model, which is not a hearing. It's not a hearing if you don't have somebody from the other side and you pick and choose what I want to show you. That's called a production, right? That's called showing me a movie, right? That's called making a presentation. It's not a hearing. Quit calling it a hearing.
Thank you very much. Our witness today is Ms. Cassie Hutchinson, who served in the Trump administration in the White House Office of Legislative Affairs from 2019 to 2020. And as a special assistant to the president in the White House Chief of Staff's office from March 2020 through January 2021. I will now swear in our witness. The witness will please stand and raise her right hand.
I know I shouldn't let this bother me, but this could have been done beforehand. It's just more of the show.
Under penalty of perjury, that the testimony
And
you're about to
again,
give is
I don't think Cheney and Thompson are lawyers, but they don't understand this. This doesn't help. People aren't impressed by this.
Let the record reflect the witness answered in the affirmative. I now recognize myself for questions. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like to start with a few questions about your background. These are some photographs we've obtained highlighting your career. These show you with members of Congress, including Steve Scalise, as well as the White House.
They're basically trying to burden, bump up her
Others
Republican
show you with
credentials.
the President and members of Congress aboard Air Force One. Before you worked in the White House, you worked on Capitol Hill for Representative Steve Scalise, the Republican whip, and Senator Ted Cruz. And then in 2019, you moved to the White House and served there until the end of the Trump administration in 2020. When you started at the White House, you served in the Office of Legislative Affairs. We understand that you were initially hired as a staff assistant, but were soon promoted to a position of greater responsibility. Can you explain your role for the committee?
When I moved over to the White House Chief of Staff's office with Mr. Meadows when he became the 4th Chief of Staff, it's difficult to describe a typical day. I was a special assistant to the President and an advisor to the Chief of Staff. The days depended on what the President was doing that day, and that's kind of how my portfolio was reflected. I had a lot of outreach with members of Congress, senior cabinet officials. I would work on policy issues with relevant internal components and members on the Hill, as well as security protocol at the White House complex for Mr. Meadows and the President.
And then you received another promotion in March 2020. At that time, you became the principal aide to the new White House Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows. Is that right?
That's correct, sir.
What did a typical day look like for you in your work with Mr. Meadows?
It varied with what was going on. We spent a lot of time on the Hill. I spent time on the Hill independently too, as I was his liaison for Capitol Hill. We did a lot of presidential travel engagements, but mostly I was there to serve what the Chief of Staff needed, and a lot of times what the Chief of Staff needed was a reflection of what the President's schedule was detailed to do that day.
So
This is kind of boring.
I'm
I'm not really sure why they're going through this.
In your position, both with members of Congress and with senior members of the Trump administration?
That's correct. That's a fair assessment, sir.
And would you say that in your work with Mr. Meadows, you are typically in contact with him and others in the White House throughout the day?
That's correct, sir. Mr. Meadows and I were in contact almost pretty much throughout every day, consistently.
Although so much of grave importance happens in the West Wing of the White House, it's quite a small building. Above me on the screen, you can see.
And see, again, I mean, he's testifying. He can't do that in a court of law. You can't say a lot of the. There's no question there. It's just a statement by Benny Thompson. So again, they're judge, they're jury, they're executioner, everything in one. It's kind of silly. Now, what he's trying to do here is basically set up. She's a Republican. She knows a lot of Republicans. Obviously, a Republican would never turn against it because they wouldn't do that, right? And then now they're trying to say she was deeply involved in the Trump White House. Folks, you really could do that in about 3 or 4 questions. But again, these people are amateurs.
Map of the first floor of the West Wing of the White House. On the right, you can see the President's Oval Office. On the left, the Chief of Staff's office.
They're trying to show how
Within the
close
Chief
she
of
is to the
Staff's
events.
office
This
suite
is effective. I like
the
this.
heart of the West Wing was your desk, which was between the Vice President's office, Ms. Kirshner's office, and the Oval Office. Ms. Hutchinson, is this an accurate depiction of where you were located?
It's accurate. It's a lot smaller than it looks.
Absolutely. Ms. Hutchins, this is a photo that shows the short distance between your office and the president's Oval Office. And it only takes 5 to 10 seconds or so to walk down the hall from your office to the Oval Office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you. Pursuant to the Section 5C8 of House Resolution 503, the chair recognizes the gentlewoman from Wyoming, Ms. Cheney, for questions.
Yeah, they've been doing
Thank
this.
you very much, Mr. Chairman.
The two co-chairs go through it, and
Mr.
then
Chairman,
who
we
knows?
will begin today with an exchange that first provided Ms. Hutchinson a tangible sense of the ongoing planning for the events of January 6th. On January 2nd, 4 days before the attack on our Capitol, President Trump's lead lawyer, Mr. Giuliani, was meeting with White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows and others. Ms. Hutchinson, do you remember Mr. Giuliani meeting with Mr. Meadows on January 2nd, 2021?
I do. He met with Mr. Meadows in the evening of January 2nd, 2021.
And we understand that you walked Mr. Giuliani out of the White House that night, and he talked to you about January 6th. What do you remember him saying?
What happened?
It's going to be a great day. I remember looking at him and saying, Rudy, could you explain what's happening on the 6th? He had responded something to the effect of, the president's going to be there, he's going to look powerful, he's going to be with the members, he's going to be with the senators. Talk to the chief about it, he knows about it.
And did you go back then up to the West Wing and tell Mr. Meadows about your conversation with Mr. Giuliani?
I did, after Mr. Giuliani had left the campus.
All right, folks. So obviously that's rank hearsay. But anyway, it could potentially be allowed because I think they're not trying to establish that it happened, but they're trying to establish some other things. So there are some exceptions you could get that in. But again, we all know this. Everybody knows, we've known since November of 2020 that Trump was going to challenge Biden's certification. So this is just more corroboration of what we already know. Nothing big here so far.
I went back up to our office and I found Mr. Meadows in his office on the couch. He was scrolling through his phone. I remember leaning against the doorway and saying, I just had an interesting conversation with Rudy, Mark. Sounds like we're going to go to the Capitol. He didn't look up from his phone and said something to the effect of, there's a lot going on, Cass, but I don't know, things might get real bad on January 6th.
Ms. Hutchinson, Mr. Meadows is engaged in litigation with the committee to try to avoid testifying here. What was your reaction when he said to you things might get real bad?
In the days before January 2nd,
Now, folks, I want you to understand, again, there is no way in any rational universe they didn't know about this testimony. And again, it's not bomb shaking, so what? So apparently now the new revelation, quote unquote, is that Meadows thought it was going to get real bad, whatever that means. But they know about this. So this whole idea that we had surprise information so far, if this is it, is a lie.
Apprehensive about the 6th. I had heard general plans for a rally. I had heard tentative movements to potentially go to the Capitol. But when hearing Rudy's take on January 6th and then Mark's response, that evening was the first moment that I remember feeling scared and nervous for what could happen on January 6th. And I had a deeper concern for what was happening with the planning aspects of it.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Today, we're going to be focusing primarily on the events of January 5th and 6th at the White House. But to begin and to frame the discussion, I want to talk about a conversation that you had with Mr. John Ratcliffe, the Director of National Intelligence. And you had this conversation in December of 2020. Mr. Ratcliffe was nominated by President Trump to oversee U.S. intelligence, our U.S. intelligence community. And before his appointment, Mr. Ratcliffe was a Republican member of Congress. As you will see on this clip, Director Ratcliffe's comments in December of 2020 were prescient.
My understanding was Director Ratcliffe didn't want much to do with the post-election period. Director Ratcliffe felt that it wasn't something that the White House should be pursuing. It felt it was dangerous for the president's legacy. He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous, either for our democracy or the way that things were going for the six.
When you say it wasn't something the White House should be pursuing, what's the it?
Trying to fight the results of the election, finding missing ballots, pressuring filing lawsuits in certain states where there didn't seem to be significant evidence, and reaching out to state legislatures about that. So pretty much the way that the White House is handling the post-election period, he felt that there could be dangerous repercussions in terms of precedent set for elections, for our democracy, for the six. He was hoping that we would concede.
So, Ms. Hutchinson, now we're going to turn to certain information that was available before January 4th and what the Trump administration and the president knew about the potential for violence before January 6th. On the screen, you will see an email received by Acting Deputy Attorney General Donahue on January 4th from the National Security Division of the Department of Justice. Mr. Donahue testified in our hearings last week. The email identifies apparent planning by those coming to Washington on January 6th to, quote, occupy federal buildings, and discussions of, quote, invading the Capitol building. Here's what Mr. Donahue said to us.
And we knew that if you have tens of thousands of very upset people showing up in Washington, D.C., that there was potential for violence.
The U.S. Secret Service was looking at similar information and watching the planned demonstrations. In fact, their intelligence division sent several emails to White House personnel like Deputy Chief of Staff Tony Ornato.
Now, again, folks, I don't know why they're going down this road, because we already know that Nancy turned down, or Nancy didn't get more security, Capitol Police didn't get more security. So if you already had people knowing there was a potential for violence, why didn't people do it? They can't keep their story straight is the problem.
Head of the President's Protective Detail, Robert Engel, including certain materials listing events like those on the screen. The White House continued to receive updates about planned demonstrations, including information regarding the Proud Boys organizing and planning to attend events on January 6th. Although Ms. Hutchinson has no detailed knowledge of any planning involving the Proud Boys for January 6th, she did note this.
I recall.
Okay, listen, this is insanity. She just said, she just testified, although she doesn't know it. She can't do that. Then you're actually playing video of the person who's there. To impeach the person, to tell them what to say? They were making a mockery of the American judicial system before today. Just every hearing it gets worse. This is the dumbest, craziest thing I've ever seen.
The word Oath Keeper and hearing the word Proud Boys closer to the planning of the January 6th rally when Mr. Giuliani would be around.
On January 3rd, the Capitol Police issued a special event assessment. In that document, the Capitol Police noted that the Proud Boys and other groups planned to be in Washington, D.C. on January 6th, and indicated that, quote, unlike previous post-election protests, the targets of the pro-Trump supporters are not necessarily the counter-protesters as they were previously, but rather Congress itself is the target on the 6th. Of course, we all know now that the Proud Boys showed up on January 6th, marched from the Washington Monument to the Capitol that day, and led the riotous mob to invade and occupy our Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I want to play you a clip of one of our meetings when you described a call on January 4th that you received from National Security Advisor Robert
Unbelievable.
O'Brien on the
Unbelievable.
same topic, potential violence on January 6th.
I received a call from Robert O'Brien, the National Security Advisor. He had asked if he could speak with Mr. Meadows about potential words of violence that he was hearing that were potentially going to happen on the Hill on January 6th. I had asked if he had connected with Tony Ornato because Tony Ornato had a conversation with him, with Mark, about that topic. Robert had said, I'll talk to Tony, and then I don't know if Robert ever connected with Mark about the issue.
Ms. Hutchinson, can you describe for us Mr. Ornato's responsibilities as Deputy Chief of Staff?
The Deputy Chief of Staff position at the White House for operations is arguably one of the most important positions that somebody can hold. They're in charge of all security protocol for the campus and all presidential protectees, primarily the president and the first family, but anything that requires security for any individual that has presidential protection, so the Chief of Staff or the National Security Advisor, as well as the Vice President's team too. Tony would oversee all of that, and he was the conduit for security protocol between White House staff and the United States Secret Service.
Thank you. And you also described a brief meeting between Mr. Ornato and Mr. Meadows on the potential for violence. The meeting was on January 4th. They were talking about the potential for violence on January 6th. Let's listen to a clip of that testimony.
I remember Mr. Ornato had talked to him about intelligence reports. I just remember Mr. Ornato coming in and saying that we had intel reports saying that there could potentially be violence on the 6th.
You also told us about reports of violence and weapons that the Secret Service were receiving on the night of January 5th and throughout the day on January 6th. Is that correct?
That's correct.
There are reports that police in Washington, D.C. had arrested several people with firearms or ammunition following a separate pro-Trump rally in Freedom Plaza on the evening of January 5th. Are those some of the reports that you recall hearing about?
They are.
Of course, the world now knows that the people who attacked the Capitol on January 6th had many different types of weapons. When a president speaks,
That's a
the
lie.
Secret
Come
Service
on.
typically requires those attending to pass through metal detectors, known as magnetometers, or MAGs for short. The Select Committee has learned that people who willingly entered the enclosed area for President Trump's speech were screened so they could attend the rally at the Ellipse. They had weapons and other items that were confiscated: pepper spray, knives, brass knuckles, tasers, body armor, gas masks, batons, blunt weapons. And those were just from the people who chose to go through the security for the president's event on the Ellipse.
All right, now they're trying to show that the Trump crowd was armed. Why weren't any of the people that were arrested and have been charged, why didn't any of them have this? This makes no sense at all, folks. Again, it's also rank hearsay. She is reading it. They have learned. We have learned this. We have learned that. Where's the actual evidence? You can say you've learned anything. I mean, this is just a mockery.
Several thousand
I don't think it's going to be
members of the
effective.
crowd
But
who refused to go through the MAGs and watched from the lawn near the Washington Monument. The Select Committee has learned about reports from outside the magnetometers and has obtained police radio transmissions identifying individuals with firearms, including AR-15s, near the Ellipse on the morning of January 6th. Let's listen.
There's an individual in a tree. He's gonna be a white male, about 6 feet tall, thin build, brown cowboy boots. He's got blue jeans and a blue jean jacket, and underneath the blue jean jacket, the complainants both saw a stock with AR-15. He's gonna be with a group of individuals, about five to eight other individuals. Two of the individuals in that group at the base of the tree, near the porta potties, were wearing green fatigues, green olive drab style fatigues, about 5'8", 5'9", skinny white males, brown cowboy boots. They had Glock style pistols in their waistband.
8736 with the message that subject weapon on his right hip. After that, he's in the tree.
Motor One, make sure PPD knows they have an elevated threat in the tree south side of Constitution Avenue. Look for the Don't Tread on Me flag, American flag face mask, cowboy boots, weapon on the right side hip.
I got 3 men walking down the street in fatigue while carrying AR-15, copy at 14th and Independent.
So again, none of these people breached the Capitol. So apparently, again, people here, assuming that's true, they had firearms. None of them went to the Capitol. Nobody was arrested with a firearm.
AR-15s at 14th and Independence. As you saw in those emails, the first report that we showed, we now know was sent in the 8 o'clock hour on January 6th. This talked about people in the crowd wearing ballistic helmets and body armor, carrying radio equipment, and military-grade backpacks. The second report we showed you on the screen was sent by the Secret Service in the 11 a.m. hour, and it addressed reports of a man with a rifle near the ellipse. Ms. Hutchinson, in prior testimony, you described for us a meeting in the White House around 10 a.m. in the morning of January 6th, involving Chief of Staff Meadows and Tony Ornato. Were you in that meeting?
I was.
Let's listen to your testimony about that meeting, and then we'll have some questions.
I think the last time we talked, you mentioned that some of the weapons that people had at the rally included flagpoles, oversized sticks or flagpoles, bear spray. Is there anything else that you recall hearing about that the people who would gather on the ellipse had?
I recall Tony and I having a conversation with Mark probably around 10 a.m., 10:15 a.m., where I remember Tony mentioning knives, guns in the form of pistols and rifles, bear spray, body armor, spears, and flagpoles. Spears were one item, flagpoles were one item, and then Tony had relayed to me something to the effect of, and these effing people are fastening spears onto the ends of flagpoles.
Ms. Hutchinson, here's a clip of your testimony regarding Mr. Meadows' response to learning that the rally attendees were armed that day.
What was Mark's reaction, Mr. Meadows' reaction to this list of weapons that people had in the crowd?
When Tony and I went in to talk to Mark that morning, Mark was sitting on his couch and on his phone, which was something typical. And I remember Tony just got right into it. I was like, sorry, I just want to let you know, and informed him, like, this is how many people we have outside the mags right now. These are the weapons that we're known to have. It's possible he listed more weapons off that I just don't recall. And gave him a brief but and concise explanation, but also fairly thorough. And I remember distinctly Mark not looking up from his phone. And I remember Tony finishing his explanation and it taking a few seconds for Mark to say something to the point where I almost said, Mark, did you hear him? And then Mark chimed in and was like, all right, anything else? Still looking down at his phone. And Tony looked at me and I looked at Tony and Tony said, no, sir, do you have any questions? He's like, what are you hearing? And I looked at Tony and I was like, sir, he just told you about what was happening down at the rally. So he was like, yeah, I know. And then he looked up and said, have you talked to the president? And Tony said, yes, sir, he's aware too. And he said, all right, good.
He asked Tony if Tony had informed the president.
Yes.
And Tony said, yes, he had.
So, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Ornato told the president about weapons at the rally on the morning of January 6th?
That's what Mr. Ornato relayed.
Okay, again, I mean, this is you already know. So far, again, as I told you, they contradict themselves all the time. So this is nothing new. We already know this. This is not new information. They knew about it before. Again, none of these weapons ended up in the Capitol. So I don't know what the heck this is the point of this. Not to mention, it's supposed to surprise Meadows and it's supposed to surprise Trump that Trump supporters are armed. I mean, these are the Second Amendment crowd. These people, of course, I'm sure they're armed all the time and they never do anything. In fact, they didn't do anything at the Capitol. I'm sorry she's alarmed, and they're trying to make it sound like, Tony Ornato is alarmed, but I don't get it. Again, this is These people are a dud. They really
Here's
are.
how you characterize Mr. Meadows' general response when people raised concerns about what could happen on January 6th.
Please don't play another video.
So
Talk to
at
about.
the time, in the days leading up to the 6th, there were lots of public reports about how things might go bad on the 6th, and even the potential for violence. If I'm hearing you correctly, what stands out to you is that Mr. Meadows did not share those concerns, or at least did not act on those concerns.
Did not act on those concerns would be accurate.
But other people raised them to him, like in this exchange, you mentioned that Mr. Arnado pulled him aside.
That's correct.
Ms. Hutchinson, we're going to show now an exchange of texts between you and Deputy Chief of Staff Ornato. And these text messages were exchanged while you were at the ellipse. In one text, you write, "But the crowd looks good from this vantage point as long as we get the shot. He was effing furious." And the text messages also stress that President Trump kept mentioning the OTR and off-the-record movement. We're going to come back and ask you about that in a minute. But could you tell us, first of all, who it is in the text who was furious?
The he in that text that I was referring to was the president.
And why was he furious, Ms. Hutchinson?
He was furious because he wanted the arena that we had on the ellipse to be maxed out at capacity for all attendees. The advance team had relayed to him that the mags were free-flowing. Everybody who wanted to come in had already come in, but he still was angry about the extra space and wanted more people to come in.
And did you go to the rally in the presidential motorcade?
I was there, yes, in the motorcade.
And were you backstage with the president and other members of his staff and family?
I was.
And you told us, Ms. Hutchinson, about particular comments that you heard while you were in the tent area.
When we were in the offstage announce area tent behind the stage, he was very concerned about the shot, meaning the photograph that we would get, because the rally space wasn't full. One of the reasons, which I've previously stated, was because he wanted it to be full and for people to not feel excluded because they'd come far to watch him at the rally. And he felt the mags were at fault for not letting everybody in. But another leading reason, and likely the primary reason, is because he wanted it full and he was angry that we weren't letting people through the mags with weapons, what the Secret Service deems as weapons and our weapons. But when we were in the offstage announce tent, I was part of a conversation. I was in the vicinity of a conversation where I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here. Let the people in. Take the effing mags away.
Just to be clear, Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that the president wanted to take the mags away and said that the armed individuals were not there to hurt him?
That's a fair assessment.
Again, this to me is not bombshell. Apparently it is to the committee. That's why we're hearing it. But again, I'm sure MAGA crowd people are armed all the time. They never hurt anybody. And again, since I don't understand how they don't understand. So what? There were weapons there. They didn't make it into the Capitol. No one's been charged with carrying a firearm or anything like that. What is this all about?
The issue wasn't with the amount of space available in the official rally area only, but instead that people did not want to have to go through the mags. Let's listen to a portion of what you told us about that.
In this particular instance, it wasn't the capacity of our space. It was the mags and the people that didn't want to come through. And that's what Tony had been trying to relay to him that morning. It's not the issues that we encountered on the campaign. We have enough space, sir. They don't want to come in right now. They have weapons that they don't want confiscated by the Secret Service, and they're fine on the mall. They can see you on the mall, and they want to march straight to the Capitol from the mall.
The president apparently wanted all attendees inside the official rally space and repeatedly said, quote, "They're not here to hurt me."
And just to be clear, so
Another example of Cheney
he
testifying.
was told again in that conversation, or was he told again in that conversation that people couldn't come through the mags because they had weapons?
Correct.
And that people, and his response was to say they can march to the Capitol from the ellipse.
Something to the effect of, take the effing mags away, they're not here to hurt me, let them in, let my people in, they can march to the Capitol after the rally's over, they can march from the ellipse.
I guess they're going to try to set up some speculative claim that Trump wanted the people to be able to get in there with the weapons so then they can take them. But now we're hearing testimony that apparently people would refuse to go through the mags and therefore make his crowd look small, but they still had the weapons. I don't know where they're going with this. This doesn't make any logical sense at all.
Then they can march to the Capitol.
Ms. Hutchinson, what we saw when those clips were playing were photos provided by the National Archives showing the president in the offstage tent before his speech on the ellipse. You were in some of those photos as well. And I just want to confirm that that is when you heard the president say the people with weapons weren't there to hurt him and that he wanted the Secret Service to remove the magnetometers.
Maybe they're suggesting
That's
they were
correct.
there to
In
hurt
photos
Congress.
that you displayed, we were standing towards
I don't
the
know.
front of the tent.
I'm at a
with
loss here,
TVs,
folks.
Really close to where he would walk out to go onto the stage. These conversations happened 2 to 3 minutes before he took the stage that morning.
Let's reflect on that for a moment. President Trump was aware that a number of the individuals in the crowd had weapons and were wearing body armor. And here's what President Trump instructed the crowd to do.
We're going to walk down, and I'll be there with you. We're going to walk down. We're going to walk down anyone you want, but I think right here we're going to walk down to the Capitol.
And the crowd, as we know, did proceed to the Capitol. It soon became apparent to the Secret Service, including the Secret Service teams in the crowd, along with White House staff, that security at the Capitol would not be sufficient.
I've had 2 or 3 phone conversations with Mr. Renato when we were at the ellipse, and then I had 4 men on Mr. Meadows' detail with me in between those individuals and then a few other bodies on the ground, just the Secret Service doing advance. They were getting notifications through their radios, and Mr. Renato in one phone conversation had called me and said, make sure the chief knows that they're getting close to the Capitol. It's they're having trouble stacking bodies.
And Ms. Hutchinson, when you said they were having trouble stacking bodies, did you mean that law enforcement at the Capitol needed more people to defend the Capitol from the rioters?
It was becoming clear to us and to the Secret Service that Capitol Police officers were getting overrun at the security barricades outside of the Capitol building, and they were short people to defend the building against the rioters.
And you mentioned that Mr. Ornato was conveying this to you because he wanted you to tell Mr. Meadows. So did you tell Mr. Meadows that people were getting closer to the Capitol and that Capitol Police was having difficulty?
After I had the conversation with Mr. Meadows, after I had the conversation with Mr. Ornato, I went to have the discussion with Mr. Meadows. He was in a secure vehicle at the time making a call. So when I had gone over to the car, I went to open the door to let him know, and he had immediately shut it. I don't know who he was speaking with. It wasn't something that he regularly did, especially when I would go over to give him information. So I was a bit taken aback, but I didn't think much of it, and thinking that I would be able to have the conversation with him a few moments later.
And were you able to have that conversation a few moments later?
Probably about 20 to 25 minutes later. There was another period in between where he shut the door again, and then when he finally got out of the vehicle, we had the conversation. But at that point, there was a backlog of information that he should have been made aware of.
And so you opened the door to the control car.
So this may be going to dereliction of duty. I'm not real sure. I mean, we started with those 7 points. And again, this witness that he should have been aware of, I mean, she that's not her business. She's an aide. But again, probably scoring a little points here.
Mr. Meadows pulled it shut.
That's correct.
And he did that 2 times?
That's correct.
And when you finally were able to give Mr. Meadows the information about the violence at the Capitol, what was his reaction?
He almost had a lack of reaction. I remember him saying, all right, something to the effect of, how much longer does the president have left in his speech?
Again, much of this information about the potential for violence was known or learned before the onset of the violence, early enough for President Trump to take steps to prevent it.
That's where we're going.
He could,
Dereliction
for
of duty.
example, have
Doesn't make
urged
any
the crowd
sense.
at the ellipse not to march to the Capitol. He could have condemned the violence immediately once it began, or he could have taken multiple other steps. But as
Again, Liz Cheney's testifying. So think about this, folks. Right? I want you to understand. So you've been charged with a homicide, and the prosecutor comes in. The prosecutor makes an opening statement, which is proper. Prosecutor makes a closing statement, which is proper, that talks about the evidence. But in this world, in the Democrats' world, she also gets to testify and add new evidence. Could have done this, could have done that. She has no idea what's going on here. None.
we'll see today and in later hearings, President Trump had something else in mind. One other question at this point, Ms. Hutchinson. Were you aware of concerns that White House counsel Pat Cipollone or Eric Hirschman had about the language President Trump used in his ellipse speech?
There were many discussions the morning of the 6th about the rhetoric of the speech that day. In my conversations with Mr. Hirschman, he had relayed that we would be foolish to include language that had been included at the president's request, which had lines along to the effect of, fight for Trump, we're gonna march to the Capitol, I'll be there with you, fight for me, fight for what we're doing, fight for the movement. Things about the vice president at the time too. Both Mr. Hirschman and White House counsel's office were urging the speechwriters to not include that language for legal concerns and also for the optics of what it could portray the president wanting to do that day.
And we just heard the president say that he would be with his supporters as they marched to the Capitol. Even though he did not end up going, he certainly wanted to. Some have questioned whether President Trump genuinely planned to come here to the Capitol on January 6th. In his book, Mark Meadows falsely wrote that after President Trump gave his speech on January 6th, he told Mr. Meadows that he was, quote, speaking metaphorically about the walk to the Capitol. As you will see, Donald Trump was not speaking metaphorically. As we heard earlier, Rudy Giuliani told Ms. Hutchinson that Mr. Trump planned to travel to the Capitol on January 6th. I want to pause for just a moment to ask you, Ms. Hutchinson, to explain some of the terminology you will hear today. We've heard you use two different terms to describe plans for the president's movement to the Capitol or anywhere else. One of those is a scheduled movement, and another one is OTR. Could you describe for us what each of those mean?
A scheduled presidential movement is on his official schedule. It's notified to the press and to a wide range of staff that will be traveling with him. It's known to the public, known to the Secret Service, and they're able to coordinate the movement days in advance. An off-the-record movement is confined to the knowledge of a very, very small group of advisors and staff. Typically, a very small group of staff would travel with him, mostly that are just included in the national security package. You can pull an off-the-record movement together in less than an hour. It's a way to kind of circumvent having to release it to the press, if that's the goal of it, or to not have to have as many security parameters put in place ahead of time to make the movement happen.
Thank you. And let's turn back.
My guess is that when they were deposing her, what they've got out of her, because she does make a good witness. I mean, she's attractive and she seems to be well spoken and all that. My guess is that in about 3 to 4 or 5, however long they spoke to her, they got that she was sympathetic and she didn't like this. She probably got pulled aside by Hirschman or some of these other people and been told all kinds of things that were inappropriate and all this stuff. And they said, oh, she's a sympathetic witness. Then they decided to spring this on us because they like the drama. They think it's going to make headlines or something. Nothing to see here so far.
The president's plans to travel
Nothing
to the
to see here so
Capitol
far that
on
damages
January
Trump.
6th. We know that White House counsel Pat Cipollone was concerned about the legal implications of such a trip, and he agreed with the Secret Service that it shouldn't happen. Ms. Hutchinson, did you have any conversations with Pat Cipollone about his concerns about the president going to the Capitol on January 6th?
On January 3rd, Mr. Cipollone had approached me, knowing that Mark had raised the prospect of going up to the Capitol on January 6th. Mr. Cipollone and I had a brief private conversation where he said to me, we need to make sure that this doesn't happen. This would be legally a terrible idea for us. We have serious legal concerns if we go up to the Capitol that day. And he then urged me to continue relaying that to Mr. Meadows, because it's my understanding that Mr. Cipollone thought that Mr. Meadows was indeed pushing this along with the president.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that you also spoke to Mr. Cipollone on the morning of the 6th as you were about to go to the rally on the Ellipse. And Mr. Cipollone said something to you like, make sure the movement to the Capitol does not happen. Is that correct?
That's correct. I saw Mr. Cipollone right before I walked out onto West Exec that morning, and Mr. Cipollone said something to the effect of, please make sure we don't go up to the Capitol, Cassidy. Keep in touch with me. We're going to get charged with every crime imaginable if we make that movement happen.
And do you remember which crimes Mr. Cipollone was concerned with?
In the days leading up to the 6th, we had conversations about potentially obstructing justice or defrauding the electoral count.
Let's hear about some of those concerns that you mentioned earlier in one of your interviews with us.
Having a private conversation with Pat late in the afternoon of the 3rd or the 4th, that Pat was concerned it would look like we were obstructing justice or obstructing the electoral college count. And I apologize for probably not being very firm with my legal terms here. But,
all right, now, folks, again, so this is not really bombshell, but this is kind of new information. We hadn't gotten this before. But again, they just don't know what they're doing, and they're making a mistake. So what I'm seeing now is, again, they're impeaching their own witness. They've been doing this a lot. Okay, so now she was very sympathetic. She I'm having to read through it as a juror that she's saying these things, but she seems genuinely scared, right? I mean, she seemed to generally think it was not a good idea, that she listened to the various people and she'd thrown in with the Hirschmans. Now, okay, you've impeached your own witness, because now I think she's probably going, oh my God, I might get crimed. And Cipollone told me on the 3rd, and then told me on the 6th, we're going to get hit with every crime imaginable. So now she's probably going, oh no, a January 6th committee called me. Oh, I better cooperate. I better do whatever I need to do. This is why you don't do show trials and why you don't put amateurs in charge of this. I mean, I know what they're trying to say. They're trying to say that Trump committed a crime because people within his own orbit thought that he committed a crime. But we've already seen that. The first 5 days and now 6 have shown us that there seem to be 3 groups of people. One that thought that Trump was crazy and this is nuts, you can't do this at all. And then you had the other people that were like, pedal to the metal, do what you have to do to get this right. And then these people in the middle that were like, look, I think the election was not right either, but I'm not willing to go this far. And so she's probably been pulled into the first crowd because she's scared now. I don't think this is helping her.
That it would look like we were obstructing what was happening on Capitol Hill. And he was also worried that it would look like we were inciting a riot or encouraging a riot to erupt on the Capitol, at the Capitol.
In fact, in the days before January 6th and on January 6th itself, President Trump expressed to multiple White House aides that he wanted to go to the Capitol after his speech. Here's what various White House aides have told the committee about the president's desire to go to the Capitol.
Did the president tell you this, that he wanted to speak at the Capitol?
Correct, yes. During the meeting in the dining room, did the idea of the president
proceeding or walking to the Capitol on the 6th after his speech come up?
Walking to the Capitol? No.
Driving to the Capitol?
It came up.
Okay, how did it come up and what was discussed?
He brought it up. He said, I want to go down to the Capitol.
What about him marching to the Capitol on the 6th?
Yes.
Tell us about that.
So it's kind of a general thing. I mean, to get into the specifics of it, I was aware of the desire of the president to potentially march to the or accompany the rally attendees to the Capitol.
When did you first hear about this idea of the president accompanying rally attendees to the Capitol on the 6th?
Well, this was at the 6th. This was during the after he finished his remarks.
When the president said that he would be going to the Capitol during his speech on the ellipse, the Secret Service scrambled to find a way for him to go. We know this from witnesses and the Secret Service, also from messages among staff on the President's National Security Council. The NSC staff were monitoring the situation in real time, and you can see how the situation evolved in the following chat log that the committee has obtained. As you can see, NSC staff
More testimony
believed
from
that
Cheney.
Mogul, the president, was, quote, going to the Capitol, and, quote, they are finding the best route now. From these chats, we also know the staff learned of the attack on the Capitol in real time. When President Trump left the ellipse stage at 1:10, the staff knew that rioters had invaded the inaugural stage and Capitol Police were calling for all available officers to respond. When Republican leader Kevin McCarthy heard the president say he was going to the Capitol, he called you, Ms. Hutchinson. Isn't that right?
That's correct.
And in this text message, you told Tony Ornato, quote, McCarthy just called me too. And do you guys think you're coming to my office? Tell us about the call that day with Leader McCarthy during the president's speech on the ellipse.
I was still in the tent behind the stage, and when you're behind the stage, you can't really hear what's going on in front of you. So when Mr. McCarthy called me with this information, I answered the call and he sounded rushed, but also frustrated and angry at me, and I was confused because I didn't know what the president had just said. He then explained, the president just said he's marching to the Capitol. You told me this whole week you aren't coming up here. Why would you lie to me? I said, I'm not lying. I wasn't lying to you, sir. We're not going to the Capitol. And he said, well, he just said it on stage, Cassidy. Figure it out. Don't come up here. I said, I'll run the traps on this and I'll shoot you a text. I can assure you we're not coming up to the Capitol. We've already made that decision. He pressed a little bit more, believing me, but I think frustrated that the president had said that. And we ended the phone conversation after that. I called Mr. Ornato to reconfirm that we weren't going to the Capitol, and which was also in our text messages. I sent Mr. McCarthy another text telling him the affirmative that we were not going up to the Capitol, and he didn't respond after that.
And we understand, Ms. Hutchinson, that the plans for the president to come up to the Capitol had included discussions at some point about what the president would do when he came up to the Capitol on January 6th. Let's look at a clip of one of your interviews discussing that issue with the committee.
When you were talking about a scheduled movement, did anyone say what the president wanted to do when he got here?
No. Not that I can specifically remember. I remember hearing a few different ideas discussed between Mark and Scott Perry, Mark and Rudy Giuliani. I don't know which conversations were elevated to the president. I don't know what he personally wanted to do when he went up to the Capitol that day. I know that there were discussions about him having another speech outside of the Capitol before going in. I know that there was a conversation about him going into the House chamber at one point.
As we've all just heard, in the days leading up to January 6th, on the day of the speech, both before and during and after the rally speech, President Trump was pushing his staff to arrange for him to come up here to the Capitol during the electoral vote count. Let's turn now to what happened in the president's vehicle when the Secret Service told him he would not be going to the Capitol after his speech. First, here is the president's motorcade leaving the ellipse after his speech on January 6th.
I don't know what that's
Ms.
supposed to show,
Hutchinson,
but
when you returned to the White House in the motorcade after the president's speech, where did you go?
When I returned to the White House, I walked upstairs towards the Chief of Staff's office, and I noticed Mr. Ornato lingering outside of the office. Once we had made eye contact, he quickly waved me to go into his office, which was just across the hall from mine. When I went in, he shut the door, and I noticed Bobby Engel, who is the head of Mr. Trump's security detail, sitting in a chair, just looking somewhat discombobulated and a little lost. I looked at Tony, and he had said, "Did you effing hear what happened in the Beast?" I said, "No, Tony, I just got
this
back."
is all hearsay, of course,
What
but whatever.
happened? Tony proceeded to tell me that when the president got in the Beast, he was under the impression from Mr. Meadows that the off-the-record movement to the Capitol was still possible and likely to happen, but that Bobby had more information. So once the president had gotten into the vehicle with Bobby, he thought that they were going up to the Capitol, and when Bobby had relayed to him, "We're not, we don't have the assets to do it, it's not secure, we're going back to the West Wing," the president had a very angry response to that. Tony described him as being irate. The president said something to the effect of, "I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now." To which Bobby responded, "Sir, we have to go back to the West Wing." The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, "Sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol." Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel, and when Mr. Ornato had recounted this story to me, he had motioned towards his clavicles.
And was Mr. Engel in the room as Mr.
Now, folks, again, this is all hearsay, so this is totally inappropriate. This probably maybe is the bombshell they're looking to release. Now, again, it's not new information. They knew about it already. They've already heard it in the depositions. And again, it just goes to show you the different types of people we're dealing with. What I sound right now is just insubordination. The president can go wherever the president can go. So they should have taken Trump up there. And again, this is just, guilt by insinuation. So what, he was going to go to the Capitol. Maybe he was going to rally people. What the heck was he going to do? You can't insurrect a government. You can't get what, is Trump going to go in there and beat people up? I don't know what they're talking about. And then Engel not letting him go up there. I don't understand this. I don't know where this gets the January 6th committee at all. And I think this may play out in the media, not in the way they think, because I just heard about rank insubordination. And I had this concern when I live streamed the fifth hearing, where you start to have these people basically just not listening to what Trump wants to do, and they're going, "Well, I'm not doing it because what he wants to do is unconstitutional or it's wrong," or something like that. That's not the way any of this works, folks. This is not a thing that you disregard orders of the President of the United States.
Ornato told you this story?
He was.
Did Mr. Engel correct or disagree with any part of this story from Mr. Ornato?
Again,
Mr.
all
Engel did
hearsay,
not
rank hearsay.
Correct or disagree with any part of the story.
Did Mr. Engel or Mr. Ornato ever after that tell you that what Mr. Ornato had just said was untrue?
Neither Mr. Ornato nor Mr. Engel told me ever that it was untrue.
And despite this altercation, this physical altercation during the ride back to the White House, President Trump still demanded to go to the Capitol. Here's what Kayleigh McEnany, the White House press secretary at the time, wrote in her personal notes and told the committee about President Trump's desire to go to the Capitol after returning to the White House.
When you wrote POTUS wanted to walk to the Capitol, was that based solely on what the president said during his speech or anything that he or anybody else said afterwards?
So to the best of my recollection, I believe when we got back to the White House, he said he wanted to physically walk with the marchers, and according to my notes, he then said he'd be fine with just riding the beast. But to the best of my recollection, he wanted to be a part of the march in some fashion.
Okay, and just for the record, the beast refers to the presidential limousine?
Oh, come on, everybody knows that.
President Trump did not go to the Capitol that day. We understand that he blamed Mark Meadows for that.
So prior to leaving the rally site, when he got off the stage and everybody was making the movement back to the motorcade, I had overheard Mr. Meadows say to him then, as I had prior to Mr. Trump taking the stage that morning, that he was still working on getting an off-the-record movement to the Capitol. So when Mr. Trump took the stage, he was under the impression via Mr. Meadows that it was still possible. So when he got off the stage, I had relayed to Mr. Meadows that I had another conversation with Tony. The movement was still not possible. Mr. Meadows said, okay. And then as they proceeded to go to the motorcade, and Mr. Meadows had reiterated, we're going to work on it. So I talked to Bobby. Bobby has more information. Mark got into his vehicle, to my understanding. Trump got into the Beast. And after we had all arrived back at the White House, later in the day, it had been relayed to me via Mark that the president wasn't happy that Bobby didn't pull it off for him and that Mark didn't work hard enough to get the movement on the books.
The physical altercation that Ms. Hutchinson described in the presidential vehicle was not the first time that the president had become very angry about issues relating to the election. On December 1, 2020, Attorney General Barr said in an interview that the Department of Justice had not found evidence of widespread election fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the election. Ms. Hutchinson, how did the president react to hearing that news?
Around the time that I understand the AP article went live, I remember hearing noise coming from down the hallway, so I poked my head out of the office, and I saw the valet walking towards our office. He had said, get the chief down to the dining room, the president wants him. So Mark went down to the dining room and came back to the office a few minutes later. After Mark had returned, I left the office and went down to the dining room, and I noticed that the door was propped open and the valet was inside the dining room changing the tablecloth off of the dining room table. He motioned for me to come in and then pointed towards the front of the room near the fireplace mantle and the TV, where I first noticed there was ketchup dripping down the wall and there's a shattered porcelain plate on the floor. The valet had articulated that the president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall, which was causing them to have to clean up. So I grabbed a towel and started wiping the ketchup off of the wall to help the valet out. And he said something to the effect of, he's really ticked off about this. I would stay clear of him for right now. He's really, really ticked off about this right now.
And Ms. Hutchinson, was this the only instance that you are aware of where the president threw dishes?
It's not.
And are there other instances in the dining room that you recall where he expressed his anger?
There were several times throughout my tenure with the Chief of Staff that I was aware of him either throwing dishes or flipping the tablecloth to let all the contents of the table go onto the floor and likely break or go everywhere.
And Ms. Hutchinson, Attorney General Barr described to the committee the president's angry reaction when he finally met with President Trump. Let's listen.
Oh boy, more video.
And I said, look, I know that you're dissatisfied with me, and I'm glad to offer my resignation. And he pounded the table very hard. Everyone sort of jumped, and he said, accept it.
Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
Gentlewoman reserves.
All right.
Chair requests.
So anyway, again, I don't think it's getting him anywhere, but that's all just designed to say that Trump's a hothead, and so this is the drip, drip, drip of this committee, so that we're getting a little bit of new information here, and they're just kind of spreading it along. I haven't heard a crime yet. I don't know where this gets to an insurrection or to a coup. I mean, okay, so apparently he's got a temper. Who knows? I don't
in
get
the
this.
hearing room to remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted our witness from the room.
Oh, okay, the witness is leaving. I thought we might be done here.
Of the committee of today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
Okay, we're going to try to speed up and get through this. Just making a note here before I forget. Witness excused in my outline here. All right, so let's see if we can, or we may be, see if we can get ahead. Okay, they're still in recess. All right, let me pull up something real quick because I've done this before. I think I have it here. Let's see if we can get it up. Get off of that. We may have to do an ad. I'll see if I can do it. Come on, where is it? There we go. Let's see if we can get the ad. We'll skip.
Awesome.
And we're going to get the ad. All right, this is a video. This is a live interview. Ari Melber, MSNBC, Peter Navarro. Those of you who've been watching these live streams on this, we've done this many times. And basically, he's going to lay out the Green Bay sweep. The Green Bay sweep was the challenge to the January 6th certification of Biden's election victory that apparently we learned today. Trump wanted to go in person. He wanted to go there in person. I don't know where that gets him. So what? I mean, listen, is it unusual? Sure. Is it illegal? Absolutely no. All right, so I'm going to pull the audio back up here.
Great to be with you. I guess I am the trade guy, but tonight I think
got to keep an eye on that committee.
I'm the January 6th guy. The In Trump Time book shows unequivocally that both Stephen K. Bannon and President Trump should be exonerated of any violence on Capitol Hill on January 6th. And what I show in the In Trump Time book is this plan we had called the Green Bay sweep, clearly between constitutional and legal lines, to basically have only legal votes counted in the election. And we had
you mentioned that we prepared for that. So let's take a look. You mentioned this.
Now, again, I'm going to tell you real quickly, and then we're going to see if we can get to the point in the video. I've played it several times, but I'm not real exactly sure where it was. But what he's saying there is, in order for us to object to states, you got to have a Republican. You don't have to have a Republican. Could be a Democrat. You got to have a senator and a congressperson. They had 8 senators at 139 Congress people ready to object. That started, and then the Capitol gets breached. It's stopped. By the time they restore order in 4 hours, nobody's willing to go forward with it. So who wanted violence? Why would Trump want violence? All right, let's take a look at the committee and see if they're back. All right, still looks like we got a little bit of time. So let's continue with this here. Now, they're going to get into a little bit. I'm going to try to scroll through it pretty quickly. They're going to get into a little back and forth about whether there's fraud, which really isn't what he's trying to explain. I wish they wouldn't do this. But
this plan, here's Steve Bannon talking about it on January 6th.
So I keep saying the mantra, you call the play, now run the play, right? It's like the old Green Bay power sweep. It's very simple, just one thing leads to another, very logical, and the victories are firm.
So go ahead and tell us in your own words, what was the plan and who was in on it besides you, Bannon, and Trump?
Sure. The backstory is while I was in the administration after the election, beginning on Thanksgiving, I produced what would be an exhaustive 3-volume report. I went over tens of thousands of pages of documents and proved that the election was in all likelihood stolen through fraud and election irregularities. That's the background. On January 6th, the Green Bay sweep plan.
That's false, but
no, they're going to get into it a little bit here. I'm going to try to move through it, but there is a Navarro report. If you go on the Google, in fact, I may do it here when we continue. I don't know what else the committee's got to do today. I don't know why they have to hold us around here, witness and recess. They can't have another hour, I wouldn't think. But anyway, they go back and forth a little bit.
The question for the start of the interview. Yes, it is fine. But the question for the start of the interview is, I just want to.
All right, it looks like they're coming back. Let me see if I can scroll.
Kind of going by rules of the road.
Results of the election in the 6 battleground states. They were Michigan, Pennsylvania,
This is the Green Bay
Georgia,
sweep.
Wisconsin, Nevada, and basically these were the places where we believe that if the votes were sent back to those battleground
We'll come back to this, but again, the point is, for that plan to work, you got to have peace and quiet. We know for a fact, it's undisputed. They started with Arizona. They were working on Arizona objections. Capitol breach. They stopped. They came back 4.5 hours. No more objections. Again, so they're not going to be able to get around that fact. I'm not sure what they're doing. So anyway, they're back, obviously. So let's see what they got to say. Hopefully, it's just closings by these fascists, and we
Chair
can move on.
recognizes a gentlewoman from Wyoming, Vice Chair Cheney.
Yeah, that's what it looks like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before we turn to what Ms. Hutchinson saw and heard in the White House during the violent attack on the Capitol,
I thought they had
on
excused the
January
witness. There, she's back.
Let's
All right.
discuss certain communications White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows had on January 5th. President Trump's associate, Roger Stone, attended rallies during the afternoon and the evening of January 5th in Washington, D.C. On January 5th and 6th, Mr. Stone was photographed with multiple members of the Oath Keepers who were allegedly serving as his security detail. As we now know, multiple members of that organization have been charged with or pled guilty to crimes associated with January 6th. Mr. Stone has invoked his Fifth Amendment privilege against self-incrimination before this committee. General Michael Flynn has also taken the fifth before this committee. Mr. Stone previously had been convicted of other federal crimes unrelated to January 6th. General Flynn had pleaded guilty to a felony charge also predating and unrelated to January 6th. President Trump pardoned General Flynn just weeks after the presidential election. And in July of 2020, he commuted the sentence Roger Stone was to serve. The night before January 6th, President Trump instructed his Chief of Staff, Mark Meadows, to contact both Roger Stone and Michael Flynn regarding what would play out the next day. Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that President Trump asked Mark Meadows to speak with Roger Stone and General Flynn on January 5th?
That's correct. That is my understanding.
And Ms. Hutchinson, is it your understanding that Mr. Meadows called Mr. Stone on the 5th?
I'm under the impression that Mr. Meadows did complete both a call to Mr. Stone and General Flynn the evening of the 5th.
And do you know what they talked about that evening, Ms. Hutchinson?
I'm not sure.
Is it your understanding
besides
that
being
Mr.
ranked here,
Giuliani,
it's so
Mr.
silly.
Eastman, and others had set up what has been called, quote, a war room at the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
I was aware of that the night of the 5th.
And do you know if Mr. Meadows ever intended to go to the Willard Hotel on the night of the 5th?
Mr. Meadows had a conversation with me where he wanted me to work with Secret Service on a movement from the White House to the Willard Hotel so he could attend the meeting or meetings with Mr. Giuliani and his associates in the war room.
I mean, none of this is surprising. You know, that Trump's
And
chief of staff would want to be there.
What was your view as to whether or not Mr. Meadows should go to the Willard that night?
Irrelevant. Who cares what your aide thinks?
I had made it clear to Mr. Meadows that I didn't believe it was a smart idea for him to go to the
Again,
Willard
impeaching
Hotel
your
that
own
night.
witness. So she didn't agree with
I
it.
wasn't sure everything that was going on at the Willard Hotel, although I knew enough about what Mr. Giuliani and his associates were pushing during this period. I didn't think that it was something appropriate for the White House Chief of Staff to attend or to consider involvement in. I made that clear to Mr. Meadows. Throughout the afternoon, he mentioned a few more times going up to the Willard Hotel that evening, and then eventually dropped the subject the night of the 5th and said that he would dial in instead.
So General Flynn has appeared before this committee, and when he appeared before our committee, he took the 5th. Let's briefly view a clip of General Mike Flynn taking the Fifth Amendment. General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
All right, now, real quickly here, folks, I don't know why you're impeaching your own witness. I really don't. I mean, so it's clear at this point, and you heard me earlier in the live stream say that I'm kind of getting the feeling that they figured out she was a friendly witness. Now we full on got it. I disagree with you participating in this, my boss. I don't think you should do it. Okay, well, that's not really your call. Okay, so this is one of the failures of this committee. Again, I'm not sure where they're going with General Flynn. I'm not sure where violence gets them anywhere. I don't know. Again, we started the show with the 7 things that they're trying to prove. This kind of goes to you caused the violence because you got them there. I agree with that, although it's not a crime. I haven't seen incitement, although they claim it, right? And then I don't know what Flynn's got to do with this. Let's see what his testimony, well, it's going to be the 5th, obviously. But anyway, was the violence justified was the question, right? Let's hear the answer.
Do we have?
Yes.
Must have been an off the record. Yeah, they had to discuss it.
Congressman Cheney, could you repeat the question, please?
Yes, General Flynn, do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified?
Is that, can I get clarification? Is that a moral question, or are you asking a legal question?
I'm asking.
I hate
both.
lawyers. Is Cheney a lawyer? I don't think she's a lawyer. I don't think she has a law degree. Let me check that out.
I said,
Do you believe the violence on January 6th was justified morally?
take the 5th.
You believe the violence on January 6th was justified legally?
5th.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
The 5th.
Now, this is something that people do a lot, and I don't think it's proper. So there's 2 different ways that it can be handled in the jurisprudential system. Some states will allow you to ask question after question after question after question after question. I think that is the improper way to do it. The majority rule, and the way that most states follow it, is you can just take a blanket 5th. So you get to come in and say, ask a question, I take the 5th, and then they can repeat a question, and you can just say, look, I'm informing you that I'm going to take the 5th as to all questions, and then that's it. And you can show that to the jury, right? You can show that they did it. Here's the problem, and you see very quickly why this is a problem, because unethical people like Cheney, do you believe in Santa Claus? I take the 5th. Do you believe that apple pie is tasty? I take the 5th. And what the person is telling you is, I'm not going to say anything because I think anything I say you're going to try to use against me. And they'll just ask all these silly little questions that they know are not genuine. But this is what she's engaging in.
Let's move on now to January 6th and the conduct of Donald Trump and Mark Meadows during the attack on the Capitol. Ms. Hutchinson, I'd like now for us to listen to a description, your description of what transpired in the West Wing during the attack. For context, in this clip, you describe the time frame starting at about 2 p.m.
So I remember Mark being alone in his office for quite some time, and I know we've spoken about Ben Williamson going in at one point, and I don't personally remember Ben going in. I don't doubt that he had gone in, but I remember him being alone in his office for most of the afternoon, around 2 o'clock to 2:05. Around 2 o'clock to 2:05, we were watching the TV, and I could see that the rioters were getting closer and closer to the Capitol. Mark still hadn't popped out of his office or said anything about it. So that's when I went into his office. I saw that he was sitting on his couch, on his cell phone. Same as the morning where he was just kind of scrolling and typing. I said, "Hey, are you watching the TV, Chief?" Because his TV was small, and you can see it, but I didn't know if he was really paying attention. I said, "You watching the TV, Chief?" And he was like, "Yeah." So, the rioters are getting really close. Have you talked to the president? He said, "No, he wants to be alone right now." Still looking at his phone. So I start to get frustrated because, I sort of felt like I was watching this is not a great comparison, but a bad car accident that was about to happen where you can't stop it, but you want to be able to do something. And I remember thinking in that moment, Mark needs to snap out of this, and I don't know how to snap him out of this, but he needs to care. And I just remember I blurted out.
All right, so this goes to a couple things. Again, I don't know how the violence helps Trump. I've already explained to it. When we finish this thing, we'll let Ari and Navarro tell us why they didn't want the violence in more detail. Again, I think this goes to the element of breach of duty or dereliction of duty. You know, but again, folks, there's no crime for that. I mean, this objectively, Trump, there's not anything Trump can do. There's so many different things. I mean, other people could be doing something. And again, you are managing to impeach your own witness. About 30 minutes ago, I thought she was doing a pretty good job for what she was supposed to be doing. Now, she is for at least the second, maybe third time, she's basically said, I know better than my boss. My boss ought to be doing something. My boss ought to cure cancer. My boss ought to cure bad breath. My boss ought to make everybody brush their teeth. It's not your job. I mean, maybe Trump wanted everybody to be calm. Maybe if he got involved, it would make it worse. We don't know. But now you've shown this witness to be somebody who absolutely stuck around and didn't like what was going on, and that's impeachable. Again, folks, I understand there's nobody there to bring this up. But in the court of public opinion, which is what they're trying to do, in the court of the Department of Justice, where they're trying to get people to make, indictments, this isn't helping them, folks. And I did look it up, by the way. She is an attorney. I didn't realize that. But Cheney graduated from law school.
Mark, do you know where Jim's at right now? And he looked up at me at that point and said, Jim? And I said, Mark, he was on the floor a little while ago giving a floor speech. Did you listen? He said, yeah, it was real good. Did you like it? And I said, yeah. Do you know where he's at right now? He said, well, no, I haven't heard from him. And I said, you might want to check in with him, Mark. And I remember pointing at the TV and I said, the rioters are getting close. They might get in. And he looked at me and said something to the effect of, all right, I'll give him a call.
Not long after the rioters broke into the Capitol, you described what happened with White House counsel Pat Cipollone.
No more than a minute and a half later, I see Pat Cipollone barreling down the hallway towards our office and rushed right in, looked at me, said, is Mark in his office? And I said, yes. He just looked at me and started shaking his head and went over, opened Mark's office door, stood there with the door propped open, and said something to Mark's still sitting on his phone. I remember glancing and he's still sitting on his phone. And I remember Pat saying to him something to the effect of, the rioters have gotten to the Capitol, Mark. We need to go down and see the president now. And Mark looked up at him and said, he doesn't want to do anything, Pat. And Pat said something to the effect of, and very clearly had said this to Mark, something to the effect of, Mark, something needs to be done or people are going to die and the blood's going to be on your effing hands. This is getting out of control. I'm going down there. And at that point, Mark stood up from his couch, both of his phones in his hand. He had his glasses on still. He walked out with Pat. He put both of his phones on my desk and said, let me know if Jim calls. And they walked out and went down to the dining room.
A few minutes later, Representative Jordan called back.
A couple minutes later, so likely around between 2:15 and 2:25. I know the tweet went out at 2:24. I don't remember if I was there when the tweet went out or if it happened right afterwards, but Jim had called. I answered the phone, said 1 second. He knew it was, I guess he knew it was me. I introduced myself, but I don't remember if he called my cell phone or if he had called one of Mark's. But I answered the phone and said, 1 sec, Mark's on the hall, I'm going to go hand the phone to him. He said, okay. So I went down, I asked the valet if Mark was in the dining room. The valet said yes. I opened the door to the dining room, briefly stepped in to get Mark's attention, showed him the phone, flipped the phone his way so he could see it said Jim Jordan. He had stepped to where I was standing there holding the door open, took the phone talking to Jim with the door still propped open. So I took a few steps back. So I probably was 2 feet from Mark. He was standing in the doorway going to the Oval Office dining room. They had a brief conversation, and in the crossfires, I heard briefly what they were talking about, but in the background, I had heard conversations in the Oval dining room at that point, talking about the hang Mike Pence chants.
That clip ended, Ms. Hutchinson, with you recalling that you heard the President, Mr. Meadows, and the White House counsel discussing the hang Mike Pence chants. And then you described for us what happened next.
Wasn't until Mark hung up the phone, handed it back to me. I went back to my desk. A couple minutes later, him and Pat came back, possibly Eric Hirschman too. I'm pretty sure Eric Hirschman was there. But I'm confident it was Pat that was there. I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong. To which Pat said something, this is effing crazy. We need to be doing something more. Briefly stepped into Mark's office. And when Mark had said something to the effect of, he doesn't think they're doing anything wrong, knowing what I had heard briefly in the dining room, coupled with Pat discussing the hang Mike Pence chants in the lobby of our office, and then Mark's response, I understood there to be the rioters in the Capitol that were chanting for the vice president to be hung.
Let me pause here on this point.
Now, obviously, folks, it's all hearsay. It's all rank hearsay. That's why you don't have show trials. But folks, I mean, if true, if you can get Cipollone to testify to that, if you can get Hirschman, sounds like he might have been part of it, or Meadows to testify to that, that would be a dereliction of duty. I mean, there's just no question. Again, I think they're scoring some points with that. Again, they shouldn't be doing it in this manner, but, you know, truth is the truth. We've got to be honest about it. So,
The rioters chanted, hang Mike Pence. The President of the United States, Donald Trump, said that, quote, Mike deserves it, and that those rioters were not doing anything wrong. This is a sentiment that...
So again, I mean, we're hearing this from somebody who claims to have overheard it, right? That is rank hearsay. It is being introduced to prove that which is asserted, right? So they're asserting that Trump thought Pence deserved it and would do nothing to intervene to help Pence when he's being attacked by a mob, right? That it's being asserted for that truth of that proposition. That's rank hearsay. No way you get it in any court of law. You'd have to bring in these people. Cipollone, Hirschman if he was there, Meadows if he was there, Trump if you can get him, who knows. But again, this is why you don't do show trials, because we're being left to listen to what somebody, and again, fortunately for us, not for the January 6th committee, they've impeached their own witness. We already know by now she didn't like anything that was going on, and she seems to be very, very concerned that people are going to be are in trouble here. When we don't really know that they were.
Other times as well. In an interview with ABC News correspondent Jonathan Karl, President Trump was asked about the supporters chanting hang Mike Pence last year. Instead of condemning them, the former president defended them.
Said hang Mike
Because
Pence.
it's common sense, John. It's common sense that you're supposed to protect. How can you, if you know a vote is fraudulent, right?
Yeah.
How can you pass on a fraudulent vote to Congress?
President Trump's view that the rioters were not doing anything wrong and that, quote, Mike deserved it, helps us to understand why the president did not ask the rioters to leave the Capitol for multiple hours. In fact, he put this tweet out at 2:24 p.m.
All right, before she gets to the tweet, folks, how does hanging Mike Pence keep you in office? You hang Pence, then the president pro temp of the Senate, I believe that would have been Grassley at the time, he takes over. Then again, now to be fair, we believe in being fair on the Great American Mail. It could be that what they're saying is, okay, you hang Pence, he's gone, then the president pro temp takes over, and then he'll do what Pence wouldn't do, send him back to the States. To be fair, that is a plausible theory. For once, they are getting close to some sort of plausible theory. Let's talk about Donald Trump's tweet here.
Ms. Hutchinson, do you recall seeing this tweet in which the president said the vice president did not have the courage to do what needed to be done?
I do.
And Ms. Hutchinson, what was your reaction when you saw this tweet?
As a staffer that worked to always represent the administration to the best of my ability and to showcase the good things that he had done for the country, I remember feeling frustrated, disappointed, and really, it felt personal. I was really sad. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
Oh, wow.
And it was something that was really
Boom.
hard in that moment to digest, knowing what I'd been hearing down the hall in the conversations that were happening, seeing that tweet come up and
Oh, wow.
knowing what was happening on the Hill. And it's something that I still struggled to work through the emotions of that.
Wow. So look, folks, this is bombshell. Now, they think it's bombshell for them, that. Now, folks, what I just heard is now the third time, maybe the fourth, she's impeached herself. So now it felt personal. As an American, I was disgusted. It was unpatriotic. Capitol is disgraced over a lie. This is a partisan person for whatever reason. Maybe it's PTSD. Maybe she was in on it. Who knows? This is a biased witness. Okay. And again, just to show you, folks, you let me, Capitol, January 6th committee, Publius@gamcast.net. Write me. I'll help you get this done. Let me give you one other tip. It looks like you're going to go the full 2 hours. I don't know why you're going to do that. Because, again, you need to break it up a little bit. Sometimes go 2:10, sometimes go 1 hour and 36 minutes. Stop while you're ahead. You know, there's been several points here they could have stopped and it would have been a nice crescendo, but no. So now they've gone so far as to impeach their own witness. They're going to be boring and always go 2 hours and do these stupid closing and things. And, again, that right there, her personal opinion, probably objectionable, but I think a lot of judges would have let it in. But again, she just went over too far there. That's not going to play the way they think it's going to play. But again, they have no idea how the average person thinks about these things.
I've also spoken to multiple other White House staff about their reaction to Donald Trump's 224 tweet, condemning Mike Pence for not having the courage to refuse to count electoral votes, an act that would have been illegal. Matthew Pottinger, a former Marine intelligence officer who served in the White House for 4 years, including as Deputy National Security Advisor, was in the vicinity of the Oval Office at various points throughout the day. When he saw that tweet, he immediately decided to resign his position. Let's watch him describe his reaction to the president's tweet.
One of my staff brought me a printout of a tweet by the president. And the tweet said something to the effect that Mike Pence, the vice president, didn't have the courage to do what should have been done. I read that tweet and made a decision at that moment to resign. That's where I knew that I was leaving that day, once I read that tweet.
Ultimately,
again, I don't think that's effective. So what? That was that person's opinion. I mean, again, what you're trying to establish, committee, is something illegal happened, right?
the White House staff, Sarah Matthews, cabinet members Secretary Chao and Secretary DeVos resigned as well. Here is Secretary DeVos's resignation letter. As you can see, in resigning on January 6th, Secretary DeVos said to the president, quote, "There's no mistaking the impact your rhetoric had on the situation, and it is the inflection point for me." Let's also look at Secretary Chao's resignation statement. When Secretary Chao resigned, she spoke of the January 6th attack, and she said, quote, "As I am sure is the case with many of you, this has deeply troubled me in a way I simply cannot set aside." Ms. Hutchinson, in our prior interviews, we've asked you about what the president's advisors were urging him to do during the attack. You've described roughly 3 different camps of thought inside the White House that day. Can you tell us about those?
There was a group of individuals.
All right, again, so
that
you
were-
saw Cheney basically testify. It's kind of silly. You should really do it through the witnesses for reasons I've described before. I mean, one, that's proper procedure. What Cheney did is improper procedure, but it's also more effective. Now, this is how typically an examination would work. You wouldn't be able to wind up like Fred Flintstone, jump up in the air and then hit the ground running. You can't say, now you've told me about three, right? You'd have to say, what were the various ideas about how to deal with the riot as you understood them and as you heard them that day? And then you can't do things like three and that, but this is closer to what you would see as an examination here. Let's hear what the three camps were.
Strongly urging him to take immediate and swift action. I would classify the White House counsel's office, Mr. Hirschman, Miss Ivanka Trump in that category of really working to get him to take action and pleading with him to take action. There was a more neutral group where advisors were trying to toe the line, knowing that Mr. Trump didn't necessarily want to take immediate action and condemn the riots, but knowing something needed to be done. And then there was the last group, which was deflect and blame. Let's blame Antifa. These aren't our people. It's my understanding that Mr. Meadows was in the deflect and blame category, but he did end up taking a more neutral route, knowing that there were several advisors in the president's circle urging him to take more action, which I think was reflected in the rhetoric released later that day in the videos.
You told us that the White House counsel's office was in the camp encouraging the president to tell the rioters to stop the attack and to leave the Capitol. Let's listen.
White House counsel's office wanted there to be a strong statement out to condemn the rioters. I'm confident in that.
Now let's
So-
look at just one example.
So
of
that's again, it's not as effective as they think it is. So again, you've got the White House counsel is disagreeing with the president. That's not their job. Their job is to advise and then do what the president says. And so I understand why they're putting it up there. They're putting it up there saying there's these other people, and then Trump's dereliction of duty because he wants to do this other thing. And they've now tried to basically make the deflect and blame look bad, but they don't know that's not true. It could easily be true that it's not his people that are doing it, right? So again, show trials don't usually go well for this very reason.
some senior advisors to the president were urging. Ms. Hutchinson, could you look at the exhibit that we're showing on the screen now? Have you seen this note before?
That's a note that I wrote at the direction of the Chief of Staff on January 6th, likely around 3 o'clock.
And it's written on a Chief of Staff note card, but that's your handwriting, Ms. Hutchinson?
That's my handwriting.
And why did you write this note?
The Chief of Staff was in a meeting with Eric Hirschman and potentially Mr. Philbin, and they had rushed out of the office fairly quickly. Mark had handed me the note card with one of his pens and started dictating a statement for the president to potentially put out.
And, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's okay. There were two phrases on there, one illegal and then one without proper authority. The illegal phrase was the one that Mr. Meadows had dictated to me. Mr. Hirschman had chimed in and said, also put without legal authority. There should have been a slash between the two phrases. It was an or if the president had opted to put one of those statements out. Evidently he didn't. Later that afternoon, Mark came back from the Oval Dining Room and put the palm card on my desk with illegally crossed out, but said we didn't need to take further action on that statement.
So, to your knowledge, this statement was never issued?
It was, to my knowledge, it was never issued.
And Ms. Hutchinson, did you understand that Ivanka Trump wanted her father to send people home?
That's my understanding, yes.
Let's play a clip of you addressing that issue.
I remember her saying at various points, she wanted her dad to send them home. She wanted her dad to tell them to go home peacefully, and she wanted to include language that he necessarily wasn't on board with at the time.
You will hear more about this at our later hearings, but we have evidence of many others imploring Donald Trump and Mark Meadows to take action.
So what?
Here is some of that evidence. Text messages sent to Mark Meadows during the attack. This is a text message at 2:32 from Laura Ingraham. Hey, Mark, the president needs to tell people in the Capitol to go home. In the next message, this is hurting all of us. And then he's destroying his legacy and playing into every stereotype. We lose all credibility against the
So we're going to hear a bunch of people saying you should send them home, send them home. Presumably, we're supposed to assume that Trump didn't want to send them home for whatever reason. The problem they have, okay, you've got to link things in a trial. You've got to give one piece of evidence leads to another, to another, to another. You got a dead body. It was killed by, a person that shot a 9mm. This person owns a 9mm, right? That's how you bring it. You don't just go, there's a murder, here's a person. He was shot by a person with a 9mm, but he doesn't own a 9mm, right? In fact, he doesn't even have a right hand to fire him. I mean, this is what they keep doing. They don't explain how the violence is going to help Trump. Anyway, they said they're going to do it in a later hearing, but so far it's kind of a dud. But we'll listen to this. And again, as it to the dereliction of duty, if they're trying to say that is the reason they're doing this, it's not a dereliction of duty. It's called the business judgment rule. If there's various different ways to approach something, you just can't come in and go, here's the way you should have done it. So the way I did it at the time was objectively reasonable. That's the standard. It has to be It has to be objectively unreasonable to punish somebody, and they can't do it.
Antifa crowd if things go south. The president's son, Don Jr., also urgently contacted Mark Meadows. At 2:53, he wrote, he's got to condemn this shit ASAP. The Capitol Police tweet is not enough. As you will see, these are just two of the numerous examples of Trump supporters and allies urging the president to tell his supporters to leave the Capitol. It would not have been hard for the president to simply walk down to the briefing room a few feet down the hall from the Oval Office. As Norah O'Donnell noted during an interview with House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy, where Leader McCarthy said he believed the attack was un-American.
I want to quickly bring in Kevin McCarthy, the House Minority Leader. Leader McCarthy, do you...
Now, folks, I want to take us back again. This is another reason why you don't have show trials, okay, where people can't bring in other sides. We all remember January 6th. We all were shocked. Nobody's in favor of this. Nobody. Now, they're trying, I think, to paint some nefarious picture where Trump wanted it because it somehow helps him stay in power, which I don't understand. But that's what they're trying to set up here. But again, there was a lot of, sort of fog of war. Nobody knew what was going on. Nobody wanted this. Nobody was really sure what to do about it. Nobody really understood why it had happened. So they're playing into that fear and going, look at these people being upset. Yeah. Okay, and then now that we know more of what happened, we know that there may have been feds in the crowd. Now that we know that the only person that was harmed that day was Ashley Babbitt, who was actually killed by the Capitol Police, right? When we know that all these people, the way they've been treated in the aftermath, we look at this a little bit differently. But anyway, they're scoring some points because people were obviously really upset, and they should be. I mean, those people shouldn't have done that. But they're going to have to tie this later, which I don't know that they're going to be able to do.
And this violence?
I completely condemn the violence in the Capitol. What we're currently watching unfold is un-American. I am disappointed. I'm sad. This is not what our country should look like. This is not who we are. This is not the First Amendment. This has to stop, and this has to stop now.
Leader McCarthy, the President of the United States has a briefing room steps from the Oval Office. The cameras are hot 24/7, as you know. Why hasn't he walked down and said that now?
I conveyed to the president what I think is best to do, and I'm hopeful the president will do it.
Republican House member Mike Gallagher also implored the president to call off the attack.
Mr. President, you have got to stop this. You are the only person who can call this off. Call it off. The election is over. Call it off. This is bigger than you. It's bigger than any member of Congress. It is about the United States of America, which is more important than any politician. Call it off. It's over.
again, they're sort of impeaching their own committee there. I thought they were much better going with McCarthy there, who, as we all know, is more of a Trump supporter. That guy is clearly somebody who's believes a lot of things that aren't necessarily true. And again, but it's effective for a show trial. Again, I don't understand what they expect Trump to do or to get them to do. In fact, Trump did much of nothing, and they got it all settled back up in 4 hours. So anyway.
The fact that many people close to Donald Trump were urging him to send people home, he did not do so until later, much later. At 4:17 p.m., Donald Trump finally told the rioters to go home and that he loved them. Here's a portion of the video President Trump recorded from the White House.
We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel. But go home and go home in peace.
But as we will show in even greater detail in future hearings, Donald Trump was reluctant to put this message out, and he still could not bring himself to condemn the attack. Ms. Hutchinson has told us that too.
The one that he put out at 4:17.
I'm sure we've discussed it, and just to elaborate if I hadn't already at that point, I recall him being reluctant to film the video on the 6th. I was not involved in any of the logistics or the planning for that video. I just remember seeing the video go out and feeling a little shocked after it went out.
On the evening of January 6th and the day after, the president's family and his senior staff and others tried to encourage the president to condemn the violence and commit to the peaceful transition of power. At 3:31 p.m. on January 6th, Sean Hannity of Fox News texted Mark Meadows. Mr. Hannity said, quote, "Can he make a statement? I saw the tweet. Ask people to leave the Capitol." Later that evening, Mr. Hannity sent another text message to Mark Meadows. This time, he shared a link to a tweet. That tweet reported that President Trump's cabinet secretaries were considering invoking the 25th Amendment to remove President Trump from office. As you can see on the screen, the 25th Amendment to the Constitution creates a process for the transition of power if a president is unfit or unable to serve. 25th Amendment has never been used to remove a president. But the committee has learned that after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, this was being discussed by members of President Trump's cabinet as a way of stripping the full power of the presidency from Donald Trump. President Trump's supporters were worried. In addition to the tweet that he sent Mark Meadows after the attack, Sean Hannity apparently spoke with President Trump and warned him about what could happen. We understand that this text message that Sean Hannity sent to Kayleigh McEnany on January 7th shows what Mr. Hannity said to the president. First, no more stolen election talk.
Yeah, we've seen this
Second,
before.
Impeachment and 25th Amendment are real. Many people will quit. Ms. Hutchinson, you told us that you were hearing about discussions related to the 25th Amendment. Here's part of what you said.
Before we get to that, let me chime in real quick on the 25th. The 25th Amendment is designed if the president is incapable because of a disability. Like he's going to go in and they're going to put him under to get a heart operation or something like that. That's what it's designed for. Now, I'm not saying it couldn't theoretically apply to mental disability, right? But it is not designed the way they're talking about it here. And folks, I just can't stress enough, this stuff is not funny. They talked about the 25th Amendment all during Trump's tenure, and it was always meant as a way to circumvent the impeachment process and get rid of somebody you don't like. Again, I'm not saying if he weren't didn't have a brain problem, you couldn't invoke it because that would be a health. But it is not invocable because you don't like what the president is doing. That's called impeachment, which they did twice, so they know how to do it, right? Anyway, let's see what her opinion of this is.
Pompeo reached out to have the conversation with Mr. Meadows in case he hadn't heard the discussions amongst cabinet secretaries. And from what I understand, it was more of a, this is what I'm hearing, I want you to be aware of it, but I also think it's worth putting on your radar because you are the chief of staff. You're technically the boss of all the cabinet secretaries, and if conversations progress, you should be ready to take action on this. Like, I'm concerned for you and your positioning with this. Reach out to me if you have any questions or if I can be helpful with you at all.
Inside the White House, the president's advisors, including members of his family, wanted him to deliver a speech to the country. Deputy White House counsel Pat Philbin prepared the first draft of what would be the president's remarks on national healing, delivered via pre-taped video on January 7th. When he arrived at the White House on the 7th, Mr. Philbin believed that more needed to be said, so he sat down and started writing. He shared the draft with Pat Cipollone, who also believed the president needed to say more. Mr. Cipollone agreed with the content, as did Eric Hirschman, who reviewed the draft. The committee has learned that the president did not agree with the substance as drafted and resisted giving a speech at all.
Perfectly within his
Ms.
right.
Hutchinson, do you recall discussions about the president's speech on January 7th?
I do.
Let's listen, Ms. Hutchison, to what you told us about that and about the process of crafting those remarks.
I learned from a conversation with Mark and overhearing between him and White House counsel and Eric Hirschman as well that Trump didn't necessarily think he needed to do anything more on the 7th than what he had already done on the 6th. When he was convinced to put out a video on the 7th, I understand that he had a lot of opinions about what the context of that announcement were to entail. I had original drafts of the speech where there were several lines that didn't make it in there about prosecuting the rioters or calling them violent. He didn't want that in there. He wanted to put in there that he wanted to potentially pardon them. And this is just with the increased emphasis of his mindset at the time, which was he didn't think that they did anything wrong. The people who did something wrong that day, or the person who did something wrong that day, was Mike Pence by not standing with him.
But the president's advisors urged him to give the speech.
Who convinced him to do the video on the 7th?
I'm not sure who convinced him or if it was a group of people that convinced him.
Who was in the group that you're aware of?
That I'm aware of: Mark, Ivanka, Jared Kushner, Eric Hirschman, Pat Cipollone, Pat Philbin. Those are the people that I'm aware of.
Do you know why that group of people thought it was necessary for him to release a statement?
I believe Kayleigh McEnany as well. From what I understood at the time, and from what the reports were coming in, there's a large concern of the 25th Amendment potentially being invoked, and there were concerns about what would happen in the Senate if the 25th was invoked. So the primary reason that I had heard, other than, we did not do enough on the 6th, we need to get a stronger message out there and condemn this, otherwise this will be your legacy. The secondary reason to that was, think about what might happen in the final 15 days of your presidency if we don't do this. There's already talks about invoking the 25th Amendment. You need this as cover.
The president ultimately...
Okay, again, impeaching themselves. What I'm starting to see, now that we're on the 6th hearing, I'm starting to see now that there was a group of people within the White House that wanted Biden, that wanted rid of Trump. They didn't want to do anything having to do with the election, and they went on to plot to try to get him out. And then when they saw this video here, or this opportunity here, by threatening him with the 25th Amendment or else, this sounds like a coup, but it's not the type of coup January 6th is talking about. The coup is the Hirschmans and the Cipollones of the world. This is maddening to me that Trump was bribed with the 25th Amendment. So anyway, again, I think they're going to dereliction of duty about you need to do this and you do that. That's not a thing, folks. The president of the United States gets to practice the way he wants. If you don't like it, you impeach him. Number 2, you vote him out. According to them, they had already done the latter, right? So anyway, this is to me troubling testimony, and I think they've gone too far. They should have stopped about 30 minutes ago. It would have been a much more effective day for them.
Delivered the remarks. Unlike many of his other speeches, he did not ad-lib much. He recited them without significant alteration, except one. Even then, on January 7th, 2021, the day after the attack on the U.S. Capitol, the president still could not bring himself to say, quote, "But this election is now over." One other point about the speech, Ms. Hutchinson. Did you hear that Mr. Trump at one point wanted to add language about pardoning those who took part in the January 6th riot?
I did hear that, and I understand that Mr. Meadows was encouraging that language as well.
Thank you, and here's what you told us previously about that.
You said he was instructed not to include it. Who was instructing him not to include language about the pardon in that January 7th?
I understood from White House counsel's office coming into our office that morning that they didn't think that it was a good idea to include that in the speech.
That being Pat Cipollone?
That's correct. And Eric Hirschman.
Ms. Hutchinson, did Rudy Giuliani ever suggest that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
He did.
Ms. Hutchinson, did White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows ever indicate that he was interested in receiving a presidential pardon related to January 6th?
Mr. Meadows did seek that pardon. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Ms. Hutchinson. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Again, folks, this stuff would be a lot more bombshell and a lot more breaking if they wouldn't get in over their skis. At this point, they've literally, impeached themselves. You've got the Hirschman crowd, apparently Cipollone. You've got the Rosen. You got the Donahues. These guys are saying, hey, this stuff is illegal. I mean, today she dropped a lot of bombshells about Cipollone going, you're going to break every rule in the book, every law in the book. I don't believe any laws were being broken. But if you're a young aide like her and you're being told that, and these people really believe that, of course, if you're Giuliani or you're Meadows and you've been checkmated by these people and not been able to do what you wanted to do, of course you would ask for a pardon. Not to mention, imagine what we're looking here. You're looking at a show trial. If you've got any sense in the world, if Democrats were being in power, you want a pardon for anything. Looks like we're wrapping up, thank God.
Today. The members of the Select Committee may have additional questions for today's witness, and we ask that you respond expeditiously.
So he's been making that speech the whole time. So probably we'll get closings from Cheney and then Thompson, and we'll be done here. And then I'm going to go back over Navarro one more time, and we'll be done. If they've got any sense, they'll stop. Again, as per usual, they don't.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Folks,
I want to begin by thanking.
I'm going to begin by thanking the witnesses that I brought, and of course I've got to sift through about 1,000 witnesses, and I picked the best 10 who are the most anti-Trump out there. I'm going to thank this is not effective, folks. Number two, leave it what they should have done. He didn't have to get into all this nonsense about 10 days and all this crap. She should have just said, I yield, and Thompson should have said, we're adjourned. Boom. And then the last thing you'd be left with is, Giuliani asked for a pardon. His own chief of staff asked for a pardon. Instead, they're going to drone on about what the mainstream media is supposed to report on, right? And they're going to seem like they're bigger than life. And then he's going to do it again when he finishes it saying, hey, y'all, you little plebes, don't move. You little serfs, stay where you are till we can get out of here because we're really important people. Anyway, I guess we'll listen. Cheney tends to drone on more than Thompson, but I guess we have to suffer through it together, folks.
Hutchinson for her testimony today. We are all in her debt. Our nation is preserved by those who abide by their oaths to our Constitution. Our nation is preserved by those who know the fundamental difference between right and wrong. And I want all Americans to know that what Ms. Hutchinson has done today is not easy. The easy course is to hide from the spotlight, to refuse to come forward, to attempt to downplay or deny what happened. That brings me to a different topic. While our committee has seen many witnesses, including many Republicans, testify fully and forthrightly, this has not been true of every witness. And we have received evidence of one particular practice that raises significant concern. Our committee commonly asks witnesses connected to Mr. Trump's administration or campaign whether they've been contacted by any of their former colleagues or anyone else who attempted to influence or impact their testimony. Without identifying any of the individuals involved, let me show you a couple of samples of answers we received to this question. First, here's how one witness described phone calls from people interested in that witness's testimony. Quote, "What they said to me is as long as I continue to be a team player, they know I'm on the right team. I'm doing the right thing. I'm protecting who I need to protect. You know I'll continue to stay in good graces in Trump world. And they have reminded me a couple of times that Trump does read transcripts, and just keep that in mind as I proceed through my interviews with the committee."
Now, folks, again, it's effective, but it's a show trial. So now, again, you are entitled to confront the witnesses against you. Witness statement. Who said it? How do we know it's genuine? Maybe this person has an axe to grind. How do I know Liz Cheney didn't just type that up before she put it up there? That's why you don't do a show trial. Folks, again, this is all planned. They've got 2 or 3, hearings down the road. They're going to come up with garbage like this. Again, if it's happening, it's inappropriate. It's witness tampering. But we don't know that it's happening.
Here's another sample in a different context. This is a call received by one of our witnesses. Quote, "A person let me know you have your deposition tomorrow. He wants me to let you know he's thinking about you. He knows you're loyal and you're going to do the right thing when you go in for your deposition."
That one's not nearly as effective. So
I think
what?
most Americans know that attempting to influence witnesses to testify untruthfully presents very serious concerns. We will be discussing these issues as a committee.
All right, the first one was better. The second one was nothing. It was just, hey, do the right thing. I mean, I understand that in Cheney world and in Schiff world, we're supposed to assume the worst of everybody, but that I didn't hear anything other than, hey, go in there, do what you got to do. We know you do the right thing. But again, this is what a show trial is meant to do. When you can do this, you don't have to say who it is and all this stuff. For Liz Cheney to claim she's a Republican, to claim that she's abiding by the Constitution, I mean, I guess this is one of those, well, if you're going to make an omelet, you got to break a few eggs. The ends justify the means. That is always what the leftists say. I mean, Cheney is literally, you want to talk about somebody destroying their legacy? Anyway.
Carefully considering our next steps. Mr. Chairman, thank you. I yield back.
Gentlewoman yields back. Ms. Hutchinson, thank you. Thank you for doing your patriotic duty and helping the American people get a complete understanding of January 6th and its causes.
Again, thanking the witnesses is not
testifying here today.
Is not effective.
You have the gratitude of this committee and your country. I know it wasn't easy to sit here today and answer these questions. But after hearing your testimony,
I'm showing you my outline here because, as you can see here,
I want to speak directly to the handful of witnesses who have been outliers in our investigation.
Okay, so now he's talking.
A small number who have defied us outright. Those whose memories have failed them.
Okay, folks, now riddle me this, Batman. I say this all the time. They'll contradict themselves within a page, within a paragraph, within a line. You literally just heard Liz Cheney 3 minutes back in this video say you can't tamper with witness. Now this person is going to tamper with witnesses. Okay? I mean, this is unbelievable.
Again and again on the most important details, and to those who fear Donald Trump and his enablers, because of this courageous woman and others like her, your attempt to hide the truth from the American people will fail.
Oh, my God. Oh, my God.
Group of witnesses,
unbelievable.
if you've heard this testimony today and suddenly you remember things you couldn't previously
This is
recall,
unbelievable. I mean, you just saw an evidence of a show trial in real time, folks. Real time. He's doing what Cheney says that Trump's doing. Unbelievable.
Our doors remain open.
Unbelievable.
The Select Committee will reconvene in the weeks ahead as we continue to lay out our findings to the American people. The chair requests those in the hearing room to remain seated.
There you go. You plebes.
Until the Capitol Police have escorted the witness
You
and members
plebes.
from the room. Without objection.
So I'm showing my
committee stands
outline
adjourned.
again. I just want to show you how little these people have going on here. We're done. So I want to show you how little of what they're saying is important. So I did note here about Cheney and this and stuff, and then him. There's very little going on. Look, if you scroll back and you look at the witnesses, I want you to look at this in the breakup of this hearing today. How often this happens? Okay, where am I? Which is okay? Hearing day 6. All right. So Tom opening, Liz Cheney opening. All right. I'm right here, folks. Okay. I want you to understand the reason there's not something in there is not because nothing was said. About 2 or 3 minutes from Thompson, and Cheney blathered on for about 4 minutes. The reason there's nothing in there is there's nothing important to put in there. If there were, it would look like what I just showed you at the bottom, okay? Now we get to Cassidy Hutchinson. She's examined by Thompson. Explain role, special assistant to the president. March 2020, promoted to chief aide to Meadows. Examined by, now she's taken over, examined by Cheney. These are very detailed notes that I'm making about the evidence so that if I want to go back and look at the video or look at something, I can do it. And I can refresh my recollection when I get to the end to see if they've produced what they want to produce. Okay, but this is my point when I'm saying these openings and these closings aren't helping them. If you're going to do that, folks, I, as a juror, right, as sort of an expert legal person here, I should have been doing this. I should have been putting a bunch of stuff in there, but I wasn't. You know why I wasn't? Because those openings were idiotic. They didn't add anything. If they had, I would have put it in there. Okay. Another thing I want to leave before we get to Navarro, and then I'm going to wrap up for the day. But the other thing I want to show you about this is I want you to look how often. Okay, so she's examined by Cheney. They're talking about Giuliani meeting with Meadows on January 5th. Okay, now they're on to testimony that Ratcliffe didn't want anything to do with the pan. Then Donahue video, Cassidy video, Capitol Police Bulletin, video of Cassidy. Now this is testimony. Tony Ornato, Jefferson, in charge of security. Right? Then they go back to a video again. Now Cheney testifies about the max. That was, remember, she talked about how we go through the things. Then Cheney plays a video. Now Cassidy testifies about January 6th meeting. Now another video. Folks, this is a production. And it's not even a really effective production, right? If this were a hearing, like I think somebody mentioned today when we did I did my podcast, which I do a podcast everywhere. They talked about the idea that, Watergate hearings didn't happen this way. Well, guess what? No hearings in human history have ever gone this way, except leftist show trials. Okay? Anyway, one of the big problems they've got here, they don't explain how the violence is, and we're going to go back to Ari Melber, and then I'm going to wrap up the show. So let them get back. I'm going to try to get to the point where they're talking about the Green Bay sweep and why Trump and them didn't want the violence. And again, folks, so far they've gone 6 days. They haven't explained to us how the violence helps. Now, other than maybe to be petty against Pence, it doesn't help them.
States and looked at again that there would be enough concern amongst the legislatures that most or all of those states would decertify the election. That would throw the election to the House of Representatives. And I would say to you here, Ari, that all of this, again, it was in the lanes legally. It was prescribed by the Constitution. There is a provision to go rather than through the Electoral College to the House of Representatives. And
now, folks, we've talked about this many, many times. And again, he's right about that. Now, to be fair, because I believe in being fair, all right, it wasn't necessarily constitutionally in the lanes. A lot of people debated that, and we've heard, again, I believe in being fair to the January 6th committee. We've heard from we hadn't heard from Cipollone, but we've been told what he thinks. Hirschman, Rosen, Donahue, they think all this is not in the constitutional lanes, but let him continue to make the point.
What's required was peace and calm on Capitol Hill. And at 1 p.m., Senator Ted Cruz and Gosar, a representative, started the Green Bay sweep beautifully, challenging the results of Arizona. Here's the most important thing I can tell you about this. The thing that we were trying to deal with was a media which refused
All right,
to.
so that's pretty much the end of that, folks. So anyway, we will continue to follow the hearings. If you would, subscribe, share this, clip it. Sharing is caring. And again, I'm probably going to put out a few videos, if you're interested in this January 6th issue, that are single-issue podcasts that are more from the 10 to 30-minute range instead of these longer ones, and various other topics. So we will see you the next time. We don't know. As of right now, we don't know when the January 6th committee is going to reconvene. This one sort of came up out of nowhere for apparently no reason, because there was no bombshell news today that we didn't already know. But if and when they say they're going to go up, we'll be there. So you want to subscribe to this channel so you won't miss it. But it's looking like it's going to be after the 4th. So we're probably looking about a week or 2 weeks from now. Anyway, if you enjoyed this podcast or live stream, subscribe, share it, and come back and see us next time.